Hey everyone. Tonight, we're diving into the darkest, most mysterious depths of our planet's oceans, exploring secrets that have remained hidden for millennia. From colossal creatures that defy scientific explanation to ghostly shipwrecks that tell tales of tragedy and terror. From underwater anomalies that challenge our understanding of reality to sounds so haunting they've left even the most stoic researchers deeply disturbed. The ocean covers more than 70% of our Earth, yet we've explored less than 5% of what lies beneath those deceptively calm surfaces. That means there's an entire world down there waiting in the perpetual darkness, filled with enigmas that make our most terrifying nightmares seem trivial by comparison. So before we begin our descent into these mysterious waters together, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy exploring the unknown with me. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see who's brave enough to join these midnight explorations into the abyss. Now dim the lights, perhaps wrap yourself in something warm, and let's ease into tonight's journey through the ocean's most chilling secrets. When you think about the ocean, your mind might conjure images of pristine beaches, gentle waves lapping at the shore, and colorful fish darting through coral reefs. But tonight, we're venturing somewhere entirely different. We're going to places where light has never penetrated, where the pressure would implode your body in an instant, and where creatures exist that evolutionary science struggles to explain. The ocean isn't just a body of water. It's a vast, three-dimensional alien landscape existing right here on our home planet. It's a realm where fish generate their own ghostly light, where massive unknown creatures battle in the depths, and where the very geography seems to shift and breathe like something alive. Imagine yourself floating on the ocean's surface on a perfectly still night. The water stretches out around you, like black glass, mirroring stars that shimmer faintly overhead. But beneath you, extending downward for miles upon miles, is a void so deep that if you drop the tallest mountain on Earth into certain parts, its peak wouldn't even break the surface. And in that impenetrable darkness, things are moving, things are hunting, things are waiting. The ocean doesn't recognize human fears or limitations. It operates according to laws, so foreign to our land-dwelling minds that even our most advanced scientific instruments struggle to comprehend them. In the deepest trenches, the pressure exceeds 1,000 times what you're experiencing right now, sitting in your room. It would be like having 50 jumbo jets pressing down on every square inch of your body simultaneously. And yet, remarkably, life not only exists there, it thrives. Not just survives, but thrives. Beings that have never glimpsed sunlight, never felt warmth, existing in eternal midnight and bone-chilling cold. They've adapted to conditions so extreme they might as well inhabit another planet entirely. Some generate their own ethereal illumination, creating haunting constellations of bioluminescence in the absolute darkness. Others have evolved transparent bodies, like living ghosts drifting silently through the lightless water. But here's what truly keeps marine scientists awake at night. We continually discover new life forms down there, new ecosystems, new anomalies that challenge everything we thought we knew about life on Earth. Every expedition into the deep returns with footage of creatures that appear to have materialized from someone's darkest nightmare. And for each discovery made, 10 more questions emerge. The ocean has safeguarded its secrets for billions of years, and it remains reluctant to surrender them easily. It guards its mysteries jealously, concealed beneath miles of darkened water and crushing pressure. But tonight we're going to venture into that alien world and explore some of the most spine-tingling, sleep-disrupting, utterly fascinating enigmas lurking in the depths. Because if you think you understand what's truly frightening, wait until you hear about what's been living in the deepest regions of our planet's oceans, directly beneath us all this time. And the most unsettling part, we've barely begun to scratch the surface. Let's begin our journey in a location that sounds like it was pulled directly from a horror film, the Mariana Trench. Situated in the western Pacific Ocean, this underwater canyon represents the deepest known section of Earth's oceans, descending over 36,000 feet below sea level. To provide some perspective, if you could somehow remove all water from the Mariana Trench and place Mount Everest inside it, the mountain's peak would still be submerged under more than a mile of water. The Mariana Trench isn't merely deep, it's utterly alien. The pressure there is so intense that it would instantly compress any human body into something resembling organic paste. The temperature hovers just above freezing, with no sunlight, no warmth, no comfort of any kind. It's the closest experience to visiting another planet without leaving Earth. And yet, impossibly, life exists there. In 1960, two courageous individuals, Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh, descended to the trench's deepest section in a specially designed submersible called the Trieste. They became the first humans to visit Challenger Deep, the very bottom of the Mariana Trench. What they discovered there forever altered our understanding of life on Earth. Even at that crushing depth, with pressure exceeding 1,000 times that at sea level. They observed fish. Living fish, swimming around as if such extreme conditions were perfectly normal. But that was merely the beginning. In the decades since, as technology has advanced, and we've deployed more sophisticated equipment into the abyss, we've discovered entire ecosystems flourishing in conditions that should be lethal to any living organism. We're talking about creatures that have never experienced daylight, that have evolved in complete isolation for millions of years, that have adapted to survive in an environment more hostile than Mars' surface. There are gigantic single-celled organisms down there, some as large as dinner plates, resting on the seafloor like alien pancakes. There are glass sponges resembling underwater cathedrals, some thousands of years old, silently filtering water and growing in the eternal darkness. And then there are the things that move, the things that hunt, the things that have evolved in ways that seem to violate every principle of biology we thought we understood. Deep-sea anglerfish drift through the darkness, like living nightmares, with bioluminescent lures dangling from their heads like glowing fishing lines, waiting to attract prey in the pitch-black water. Their mouths contain needle-sharp teeth, angled inward, designed to ensure that anything captured can never escape. In some species, the male fish is dramatically smaller than the female, literally fusing with her body and becoming nothing more than a permanent sperm-producing appendage. It resembles something from a body horror film, except it's real, happening right now, miles beneath your feet. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Mariana Trench isn't what we found there. It's what we haven't found. Every expedition returns with footage of new creatures, new formations, new mysteries that challenge our understanding of what's possible. And the deeper we go, the stranger it becomes. Scientists estimate we've explored less than 1% of the deep ocean, meaning 99% of our planet's deepest regions remain completely unknown to us. What else lurks in those unexplored depths? What kinds of creatures have evolved in isolation for millions of years, developing in ways our surface-dwelling minds cannot even imagine? What ancient secrets lie buried in the deepest trenches of the ocean floor? And perhaps most unsettling of all, what if some of those creatures aren't content to remain in the depths forever? The Mariana Trench offers a glimpse into an alien world existing right here on our own planet. It reminds us that Earth still harbors mysteries that make our most creative science fiction seem tame by comparison. And every time we believe we've witnessed the strangest thing the deep ocean has to offer, it surprises us with something even more bizarre, even more impossible, even more likely to keep you awake at night, wondering what else might be lurking in the darkness below. As we venture deeper into the ocean's mysteries, we encounter a phenomenon that has puzzled marine biologists for decades: bioluminescence. Imagine this: you're floating in the absolute darkness of the deep ocean, where no sunlight has ever penetrated, when suddenly the water around you erupts in an ethereal light show that would make any fireworks display seem like a cheap flashlight. This isn't some rare occurrence. This happens constantly throughout the world's oceans. Creatures literally create their own light through chemical reactions within their bodies, transforming the darkest places on Earth into something resembling an underwater aurora borealis. But unlike the northern lights, which are beautiful and distant, bioluminescence in the deep ocean often serves purposes that are decidedly more sinister. Many deep-sea creatures use bioluminescence as a weapon, a lure, or a defense mechanism. The anglerfish, which we mentioned earlier, dangles a glowing appendage in front of its grotesque face, attracting curious prey directly into its waiting jaws. Certain squid species can eject luminescent fluid, creating a cloud of light that confuses predators while they escape into the darkness. Some creatures use bioluminescence, like a burglar alarm, lighting up brilliantly when disturbed, to attract larger predators that will hopefully target whatever was attacking them. The truly unsettling thing about bioluminescence is how it transforms the deep sea into a place of deception and danger. In a world of absolute darkness, any light becomes an irresistible attraction. It's like a siren's call, drawing in the curious and the hungry alike. And in many cases, that light is the last thing these creatures ever see. It's nature at its most beautiful and most deadly, simultaneously, a reminder that in the deep ocean, nothing is ever quite what it seems. Scientists have documented bioluminescent organisms at every depth of the ocean, from the surface to the deepest trenches. But what's particularly fascinating is that the deeper you go, the more common bioluminescence becomes. In the midnight zone, over 1,000 meters down, an estimated 90% of creatures produce their own light in some form. It's as if the deeper, darker parts of our world have developed their own alternative to sunlight, a parallel evolution that allows life to thrive where it seemingly shouldn't be possible. But there's another aspect of bioluminescence that keeps researchers up at night. We still don't fully understand how or why it evolved in so many different species independently. It's one of those evolutionary puzzles that suggests there might be aspects of deep-sea life that operate according to rules we haven't yet discovered. And whenever science encounters something it can't explain, That's when the truly fascinating questions begin to emerge. What if bioluminescence serves purposes beyond what we currently understand? What if these creatures are communicating in ways we can't comprehend, sending messages through the darkness in a language of light? What if some of the patterns we've observed aren't random at all, but part of some vast, slow conversation happening in the deep that we're only just beginning to notice? The ocean keeps its secrets well, and bioluminescence might be one of its most beautiful mysteries, and potentially one of its most revealing, if only we could decipher what these lights in the darkness are truly telling us. Now let's dive into one of the most persistent and chilling mysteries of the deep, the phenomenon known as underwater USOs, or unidentified submerged objects. For decades, naval personnel, commercial fishermen, and oceanographers have reported encounters with massive, fast-moving objects beneath the waves that seem to defy the laws of physics. These aren't small anomalies. We're talking about enormous structures, sometimes hundreds of feet across, moving through water at speeds that should be impossible, according to our understanding of hydrodynamics. Objects that can reportedly accelerate from stationary to hundreds of knots in seconds, without creating a cavitation bubble or sonic boom that should occur at such speeds underwater. In 1963, the USS Thresher, a nuclear submarine, was lost with all hands during deep dive tests. The official explanation was a mechanical failure, but some researchers have pointed to unusual sonar readings recorded just before the Thresher lost contact. Readings that showed something massive, moving near the submarine at speeds no known underwater vehicle could achieve. Of course, the Navy dismisses such claims as misinterpretations of regular sonar data, but the questions persist. What makes USO reports particularly disturbing is their consistency across time and geography. Naval archives from different countries contain strikingly similar accounts spanning decades, describing encounters with enormous, silent, fast-moving objects that seem to be under intelligent control. Objects that sometimes approach military vessels, observe them for a period, and then disappear by either shooting away at impossible speeds or simply vanishing. Conventional science offers few explanations for what these objects might be. Could they be some unknown species of giant marine life? Possibly, but nothing in our current understanding of marine biology accounts for organisms that large moving that quickly. Could they be secret military technology? Perhaps some encounters, but that wouldn't explain sightings that predate modern naval technology by decades or even centuries. Could they be something else entirely? Something that has always been there in the depths, watching us as we venture further into their domain. That possibility, however remote, is what gives USO accounts their particular chill factor. The ocean's vastness provides the perfect hiding place for something that doesn't want to be found. With millions of cubic miles of unexplored water, something could remain hidden indefinitely, emerging only occasionally to observe our activities before retreating back into the darkness. And if there is something down there, something intelligent, something ancient, would we even recognize it if we saw it? Or would our minds simply categorize it as a submarine or an anomaly, because the alternative is too fantastic to consider? In 1997, a hydrophone array designed to detect enemy submarines picked up something unusual, a sound so loud it was recorded by multiple sensors over 3,000 miles apart. The sound, which researchers nicknamed the bloop, was unlike anything ever recorded before. It was several times louder than the blue whale, previously considered the loudest animal on Earth. The sound profile resembled that of a living creature, but scaled up to impossible proportions. No known animal could possibly be large enough to produce a sound of that magnitude. The official explanation eventually settled on was that it was the sound of ice breaking off from Antarctica, but some researchers remain unconvinced, pointing out discrepancies between the sound signature of ice calving and what was recorded. Whatever caused the bloop, it serves as a reminder that the ocean still holds sounds we can't explain, possibly produced by things we've never seen. And in the darkness of the deep sea, what we can't see becomes infinitely more terrifying than what we can. Let's shift our focus to one of the most enduring mysteries of the deep, the lost city of Atlantis. For centuries, people have been fascinated by Plato's account of an advanced civilization that sank beneath the waves in a single day and night of misfortune. Most historians consider Atlantis to be nothing more than a morality tale created by Plato, but others point to underwater structures around the world that suggest there might be more to the story. Off the coast of Japan, the Yonaguni Monument features massive stone structures with seemingly perfect right angles and straight edges, formations that some claim are too precise to have occurred naturally. Near Cuba, researchers using sonar have identified what appears to be an ancient city, complete with pyramids and other structures, all now sitting under more than 2,000 feet of water. Conventional archaeology dismisses most of these findings as natural formations, misinterpreted by wishful thinking, but a growing body of evidence suggests that rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age may have submerged numerous coastal civilizations. Not Atlantis perhaps, but certainly human settlements that are now hidden beneath hundreds of feet of water. What secrets might these underwater ruins hold? What technologies, what knowledge, what art might be preserved in the oxygen-depleted depths where decay happens much more slowly than on land? Perhaps even more intriguing is the possibility that some of these underwater structures might not be human in origin at all. In the Baltic Sea, the so-called Baltic Sea anomaly appears on sonar as a perfectly circular formation with straight edges and what look like structural features. At nearly 200 feet in diameter, sitting 300 feet below the surface, it has generated intense speculation since its discovery in 2011. Official science maintains it's likely a natural geological formation, but its regular shape and distinct features continue to puzzle researchers who've studied the sonar images. The ocean floor is like a museum of Earth's history, preserving in its sediments and structures the record of everything that has occurred on our planet. Cities swallowed by rising seas, civilizations lost to cataclysm, and perhaps evidence of visitors or inhabitants we've never accounted for in our conventional history. All of it preserved in the darkness, waiting to be discovered. And as our technology improves, allowing us to map and explore the deepest parts of our oceans, who knows what lost chapters of Earth's story we might uncover. The deeper we go into the ocean's mysteries, the more we realize that some of the most frightening things down there aren't the unknown creatures or the unexplained structures, they're the things we've put there ourselves. Since the dawn of the nuclear age, the ocean has become a dumping ground for some of humanity's most dangerous creations. Between 1946 and 1993, 13 countries disposed of nuclear waste in the ocean, including reactors with their fuel still inside. The exact locations and conditions of many of these disposal sites remain poorly documented, and some have been lost entirely to bureaucratic neglect. Off the Farallon Islands near San Francisco, nearly 48,000 drums of radioactive waste sit on the ocean floor, dumped there between 1946 and 1970. Recent surveys indicate that many of these containers have corroded, leaking their contents into the surrounding water and sediment. Similar disposal sites exist throughout the world's oceans, time bombs of contamination that could potentially affect marine life for thousands of years to come. Even more disturbing are the lost nuclear weapons lying on the ocean floor. Since 1950, there have been at least 50 known incidents where nuclear weapons were lost at sea due to aircraft crashes, shipwrecks, or other accidents. Not all of these weapons have been recovered. Somewhere in the darkness of the deep ocean, corroding nuclear warheads sit silently, their plutonium cores slowly being exposed to the seawater around them. The environmental consequences of these lost weapons remain largely unknown, a shadow hanging over the future of our oceans. Then there are the chemical weapons. After World War II, the simplest solution for disposing of captured chemical weapons seemed to be dumping them in the ocean. Hundreds of thousands of tons of mustard gas, nerve agents, and other chemical weapons were loaded onto ships, taken out to sea, and simply pushed overboard. The prevailing attitude was the solution to pollution is dilution, the belief that the vast ocean would somehow neutralize these toxic substances. We now know this was catastrophically wrong. These chemical weapons don't disappear, they persist, their containers gradually breaking down and releasing their deadly contents into marine ecosystems. These human-made horrors represent a different kind of deep-sea mystery, not what the ocean is hiding from us, but what we've hidden in the ocean, hoping it would never return to haunt us. But the ocean doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive. Everything we've dumped into its depths remains there, slowly breaking down, slowly spreading, slowly working its way back into the web of life that ultimately connects to our own dinner tables. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones that evolved in the darkness, they're the ones we created ourselves, and then tried to forget about. As we continue our descent into the ocean's mysteries, let's explore one of its most legendary inhabitants, the creature that has inspired more maritime terror than perhaps any other, the giant squid. For centuries, sailors returned from voyages with tales of enormous tentacled monsters that could wrap themselves around ships and drag them beneath the waves. These accounts were dismissed as superstition or exaggeration, the product of too many weeks at sea and too much rum. But as it turns out, the sailors weren't entirely wrong. The giant squid, Architeuthis dux, is very real, with the largest specimens reaching lengths of up to 43 feet from the tip of the mantle to the ends of the longest tentacles. Their eyes are the size of dinner plates, the largest eyes of any known animal, evolved to detect the faintest light in their deep-sea habitat. They possess a parrot-like beak powerful enough to slice through flesh and bone, and their tentacles are lined with serrated suction cups that can latch onto prey with incredible force. Despite their enormous size, giant squid remained largely mythical until fairly recently. The first photographs of a living giant squid in its natural habitat weren't captured until 2004, and the first video footage wasn't recorded until 2012. But here's where the mystery deepens. Marine biologists believe that the giant squid, impressive as it is, may not be the largest squid species in our oceans. That title likely belongs to the colossal squid, Messinicotuthis hamiltoni, a creature so elusive that only a handful of specimens have ever been studied. The colossal squid has a shorter but more massive body than its giant cousin, with tentacles armed, not just with suction cups, but also with sharp, swiveling hooks. It's the stuff of nightmares, a predator perfectly evolved for hunting in the eternal darkness. But the truly unsettling question isn't how big these creatures are, it's how big they might potentially grow. Most specimens we've recovered have been juveniles or subadults. The theoretical maximum size of a fully mature colossal squid remains unknown, limited only by the physics of their copper-based blood and the constraints of their deep-sea environment. Some researchers speculate that truly massive specimens might dwell in the unexplored depths, perhaps growing to sizes that would make even the documented giants seem small by comparison. And then there are the reports that don't fit neatly into our scientific categories. Throughout history, there have been accounts of tentacled creatures far larger than any confirmed squid species. The Lusca of Caribbean folklore, the Kraken of Norse mythology, the enormous tentacled creatures reported by the crews of HMS Daedalus in 1848 and the Pauline in 1875 all describe something larger and more monstrous than even the largest known cephalopods. Are these merely exaggerations, cases of mistaken identity, or could there be something else down there, something that makes even the colossal squid seem small by comparison? The deep sea is the perfect environment for a truly massive predator to remain hidden. With food sources ranging from fish to whales, with pressure and temperature conditions that allow for gigantism, and with the vast unexplored darkness providing the perfect cover, who's to say what upper limits nature might have reached in the crushing depths? And if such creatures do exist, lurking in trenches we've barely begun to explore, would we even want to find them? Or are some secrets of the deep better left undiscovered? One of the most persistent mysteries of the deep revolves around something we might not immediately associate with terror: sound. In 1997, NOAA researchers recorded a strange underwater sound in the South Pacific. It was ultra-low frequency, powerful enough to be picked up by sensors over 3,000 miles apart. They called it the bloop. Unlike mechanical sounds, it had acoustic patterns similar to those made by living creatures, but no known animal, not even the blue whale, could possibly be large enough to produce a sound of that magnitude. After years of speculation, scientists eventually concluded that the bloop was likely the sound of an icequake, a large iceberg cracking and breaking apart. But this explanation hasn't satisfied everyone, particularly because several other unexplained sounds have been recorded in our oceans. There's Julia, a screeching, rising tone recorded in 1999. Slowdown, a downward sweeping sound that lasted for about 7 minutes. Upsweep, a series of narrow-band sounds detected consistently since 1991. And perhaps most disturbing of all, the whistle, a sound that resembles an eerie, human-like call, echoing through the depths. The scientific explanations for these sounds range from underwater volcanic activity to previously unknown whale vocalizations to the movement of massive icebergs scraping against the ocean floor. But the truth is, we still don't know for certain what's creating many of these sounds. Our oceans are filled with noises we can't explain, potentially produced by phenomena or creatures we haven't yet identified. And in some ways, these mysterious sounds are more unsettling than any visual evidence could be. There's something primal about hearing something you can't see or identify. It triggers the deepest, most ancient parts of our brains, the parts that evolved to keep our ancestors alive when they heard rustling in the darkness outside their caves. Perhaps the most famous of all unexplained ocean sounds is the so-called 52 Hz whale, sometimes called the loneliest whale in the world. First detected in 1989, this unidentified creature calls at a frequency of 52 Hz, significantly higher than the 1039 Hz range used by other baleen whales. It appears to be a solitary individual, traveling alone and calling out with a voice that no other whale would recognize or respond to. Year after year, researchers have tracked this solitary voice as it moves through the world's oceans, always alone, always unanswered. Is it a hybrid between two whale species? A deformed individual? The last of its kind? We simply don't know. These mysterious sounds remind us that the ocean is not silent. It's filled with voices, some of which we can identify, and many which remain anonymous. And in that dark underwater world, where vision is limited and sound travels for miles, these disembodied voices create an acoustic landscape that's both beautiful and terrifying. A symphony of the deep that's been playing since long before humans existed and will likely continue long after we're gone. Let's dive deeper into one of the most enduring maritime mysteries, the phenomenon of ghost ships. Throughout history, vessels have been found drifting aimlessly at sea. Their crews mysteriously vanish without a trace. These floating enigmas, ships without souls, have generated countless theories ranging from the scientific to the supernatural. Perhaps the most famous case is that of the Mary Celeste, found adrift in the Atlantic in 1872. The ship was in perfect sailing condition, with ample provisions and valuable cargo untouched. The crew's personal belongings remained in place, and there were half-eaten meals in the galley. The only things missing were the lifeboat, the ship's papers, and the entire crew of 10 people. They were never seen again. What could compel an experienced captain and crew to suddenly abandon a seaworthy vessel in the middle of the ocean? Conventional explanations range from alcohol fumes, from the cargo causing a panic, to a waterspout or rogue wave creating a temporary emergency. But none of these theories fully account for all the evidence, leaving the Mary Celeste as one of the ocean's most perfect mysteries. More recently, in 2006, the tanker Gigantism was found drifting off the coast of Australia. Like the Mary Celeste before it, the ship was completely deserted, with no sign of its crew. Even more bizarrely, the ship had no identifying markings, and authorities were never able to determine its origin, ownership, or the fate of its crew. After failing to identify its origins, Australian authorities eventually sank the ghost ship, perhaps burying its secrets forever. What makes ghost ship cases so disturbing is not just the missing crews, but the implication that something can happen at sea that's so sudden, so terrible, that it leaves no trace beyond an empty vessel. The ocean's vastness becomes not just a physical space, but an existential void, swallowing lives and leaving behind only floating tombs of steel and wood as evidence that anyone was there at all. And for every ghost ship we find, how many more sink without ever being discovered, taking their mysteries with them to the ocean floor? There's a psychological horror to ghost ships that resonates deeply with our primal fears. A ship is supposed to be a safe haven in the hostile environment of the open ocean. When that haven becomes empty, abandoned for unknown reasons, it violates our sense of security and order. It suggests that nowhere is truly safe, that even our most carefully constructed shelters can become the settings for unsolved disappearances. Ghost ships are memento mori floating on the sea. Reminders that the boundary between presence and absence, between life and whatever comes after, can be crossed in an instant without explanation or warning. And in the modern era, with GPS tracking, satellite communications, and advanced weather forecasting, ghost ships shouldn't still be appearing, and yet they do. In 2016, an Indonesian yacht was found drifting off the Philippines with the mummified body of its German owner still seated at the radio desk, apparently trying to call for help before he died. The mystery wasn't just his death, but how the yacht had drifted unnoticed for months in some of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. It's as if the ocean itself can sometimes hide things in plain sight, creating blind spots in our global surveillance where vessels can slip through the cracks of our attention until they reappear as mysteries. Ghost ships represent one of the ocean's most perfect metaphors. We think we've mastered the seas with our technology and our confidence, but the water can still swallow lives without explanation, leaving behind only empty vessels and unanswerable questions. They are floating question marks on the surface of the deep, reminders that for all our maritime progress, the ocean remains fundamentally untamed and full of mysteries we may never solve. As we sail further into the night, let's explore one of the most feared and misunderstood regions of our oceans, the infamous Bermuda Triangle. Stretching between Bermuda, Florida, and Puerto Rico, this roughly triangular section of the Atlantic Ocean has become synonymous with mysterious disappearances and unexplained phenomena. Ships sailing through its waters have vanished without distress calls. Aircraft flying above it have disappeared from radar without explanation. Navigation equipment has reportedly malfunctioned, compasses have spun wildly, and electronic equipment has failed for no apparent reason. One of the most baffling incidents occurred in 1945 when 5 U.S. Navy torpedo bombers, collectively known as Flight 19, disappeared during a training mission. The 14 airmen aboard the 5 planes vanished, along with 13 crew members of a search plane sent to find them. No debris was ever recovered, and the last radio transmissions from the flight suggested total disorientation, with the flight leader reportedly saying, "Everything looks strange, even the ocean, and we are entering white water. Nothing seems right." What could cause experienced military pilots to become so completely lost over waters they had flown many times before? Conventional explanations for Bermuda Triangle disappearances include violent weather patterns, strong ocean currents, human error, and the region's tendency for magnetic anomalies that can affect compass readings. The area contains some of the deepest marine trenches in the world, where ships that sink might never be found. It also experiences frequent and powerful storms that can develop suddenly. But these explanations, logical as they may be, don't fully account for the sheer number of disappearances or their often bizarre nature. Some researchers point to more exotic possibilities. The region is one of the few places on Earth where magnetic north and true north align, potentially creating navigational confusion. Others note that the area is prone to massive methane gas eruptions from the ocean floor, which could potentially reduce water density enough to sink ships instantly. Still others suggest powerful electromagnetic anomalies that could disrupt both mechanical and electronic systems. But perhaps the most unsettling theory involves what lies beneath the waters of the triangle. In 1991, explorers discovered enormous pyramidal structures in the waters near the Bahamas, structures that appeared to be made of smooth, reflective material, unlike any natural formation. Some researchers have suggested these might be remnants of an ancient advanced civilization, perhaps even the mythical Atlantis. Others go further, proposing that these structures might still be active in some way, generating energy fields that interfere with our technology and, occasionally, pull ships and aircraft into whatever lies below. Of course, mainstream science dismisses such theories as pseudo-scientific speculation. But even the most skeptical researchers admit that there's something unusual about the region's disappearance statistics. Whether due to natural phenomena or something more mysterious, the Bermuda Triangle seems to claim vessels at a rate that defies pure chance. And until we can explore the deepest parts of this region with our most advanced technology, the mystery of what exactly happens in these waters will remain one of the ocean's most enduring enigmas. The ocean's mysteries aren't limited to what we can see or what we've lost beneath the waves. Some of the most profound questions involve what might be living in the depths that we haven't yet discovered, or perhaps have glimpsed only fleetingly. Marine cryptids, creatures reported by witnesses but unconfirmed by science, represent some of the most fascinating possibilities of what might be hiding in our oceans. Consider the case of the megalodon, a prehistoric shark that grew to lengths of up to 60 feet and possessed jaws powerful enough to crush a whale's skull. Conventional science tells us the megalodon went extinct approximately 3.6 million years ago. But some researchers point to unusual evidence suggesting these massive predators might still exist in the deep ocean. Unexplained whale carcasses, with massive bite marks inconsistent with known predators. Sonar readings of enormous moving objects at depths where most sharks couldn't survive. And perhaps most compelling, tooth marks on modern whale bones that match the distinctive pattern and size of megalodon dentition. Then there's the lusca, a creature reported in the deep blue holes of the Bahamas. Described as part shark, part octopus, witnesses claim it can grow to over 75 feet in length and has been known to drag fishermen and swimmers into underwater caves, never to be seen again. Marine biologists suggest these sightings might be misidentifications of large octopuses or squid, but the specific descriptions and the consistency of reports across generations suggest something unique to these particular waters. Off the coast of New Zealand, Maori legends speak of the taniwha, enormous eel-like creatures that guard sacred areas of the ocean and can change their form at will. Skeptics dismiss these as cultural myths, but New Zealand waters are home to some of the least explored deep-sea trenches in the world. With new species being discovered in these waters every year, who's to say what ancient predators might still patrol these depths? Perhaps the most widely reported marine cryptid is the sea serpent, a creature described with remarkable consistency by sailors across centuries and cultures. Typically described as 50 to 100 feet long, with a horse-like head, a humped back, and vertical undulations, rather than the horizontal movement pattern of snakes or eels. These descriptions remain surprisingly consistent, whether from 16th century Spanish galleon captains or modern cargo ship crews. In 1848, the crew and captain of the HMS Daedalus, a British Royal Navy frigate, reported observing a sea serpent for 20 minutes at close range. The captain, an experienced naval officer with a reputation for sobriety and accurate reporting, described a creature 60 feet long with a head held 4 feet above the water. Similar reports have continued into the modern era, with the crew of a South African military vessel reporting a similar creature as recently as 2007. What makes these cryptid reports particularly interesting isn't just their persistence, but their distribution. Certain types of unknown creatures seem to be reported consistently in specific regions, suggesting they might be adapted to particular environments or ecological niches. The Cabrosaurus of the Pacific Northwest. The Ogopogo of Canada's Lake Okanagan. The many-humped monsters of the Scottish lochs. Each has characteristics specific to its reported home waters, just as we would expect from actual biological adaptation. The scientific community generally remains skeptical of cryptid reports, attributing them to misidentification, optical illusions, or cultural mythology. But it's worth remembering that many now confirmed species were once considered cryptozoological fantasies. The giant squid was dismissed as sailor superstition until specimens began washing ashore in the late 19th century. The coelacanth, a prehistoric fish, was thought extinct for 65 million years until a living specimen was caught off South Africa in 1938. The megamouth shark, a 16-foot filter feeder, wasn't discovered until 1976, and fewer than 100 specimens have ever been observed. Given that we've explored less than 5% of our oceans, with much of that exploration focused on shallower regions, what else might be swimming in the darkness, occasionally surfacing to create a cryptid report before disappearing back into the depths? And as our technology improves, allowing us to venture deeper for longer periods, what creatures might we finally confirm after centuries of dismissing them as myths? The line between cryptozoology and mainstream biology has always been drawn in water, not stone, and that line continues to shift with each new discovery from the deep. Let's dive now into one of the most scientifically perplexing mysteries of the deep, the phenomenon known as underwater crop circles. First discovered off the coast of Japan in 1995, these perfectly geometric formations on the seafloor initially baffled marine biologists. Measuring up to 7 feet in diameter, these intricate circular patterns feature radiating geometric designs of astonishing precision and beauty. They appeared mysteriously overnight on the ocean floor, with no apparent creator or purpose. For years, these formations were attributed to everything from alien activity to underwater currents to secret military testing. The truth, when finally discovered in 2011, proved that reality often exceeds our imagination. These magnificent formations are created by a single male pufferfish, barely 5 inches long. Working tirelessly for weeks, this tiny artist uses only his fins to carve perfect geometric patterns in the sand, decorating them with carefully selected shells and stones. The purpose? To attract a mate. Female pufferfish are apparently impressed by both the artistic talent and the engineering precision, choosing their partners based on the quality of their sandy creations. What makes this discovery so remarkable isn't just the beauty of the formations, but what it tells us about intelligence in the ocean. A fish with a brain smaller than a pea can create mathematical patterns that took human scientists years to attribute correctly. It suggests that forms of intelligence and creativity exist in the ocean that operate on principles entirely different from our land-based understanding. And it raises an unsettling question. If we misunderstood something visible on the seafloor for so long, what else might we be misinterpreting about the creatures and phenomena in the deep? The underwater crop circles serve as a perfect metaphor for ocean exploration itself. What initially appears mysterious often has an explanation, but that explanation can be more extraordinary than our wildest speculations. And for every mystery we solve, a dozen more emerge, each challenging our understanding of what's possible in the alien environment beneath the waves. The pufferfish creates its artwork in relatively shallow waters where we can easily observe it. What artistry, what behaviors, what intelligence might exist in the darkness of the deep trenches, where no human eye has yet witnessed what unfolds? In the waters off the coast of British Columbia, an even more perplexing mystery awaits those who venture into the deep. Since the 1940s, divers and submarine operators have reported hearing what sounds like mechanical noises emanating from deep underwater caves and crevices. Rhythmic metallic sounds, similar to machinery operating or metal, being struck at regular intervals. The sounds always seem to come from inaccessible areas, narrow caves too small for human divers to enter, crevices too deep for conventional exploration. Hydrophone recordings have confirmed the sounds exist, eliminating the possibility of auditory hallucination. The noises follow patterns too regular to be random geological events, but don't match any known natural phenomenon. Conventional explanations range from trapped air bubbles vibrating through rock formations to the movement of underwater currents against metallic mineral deposits. But these explanations fail to account for the regularity and mechanical quality of the sounds. Some more speculative researchers have suggested these might be the sounds of some ancient technology still functioning in the darkness after whoever built it has long gone. Others propose the even more fantastic possibility that these sounds might be evidence of inhabited structures deep within the earth, accessed through oceanic entry points. While such theories might seem far-fetched, they highlight a fundamental truth about ocean exploration. When confronted with phenomena we can't explain, our theories say more about our own limitations than about what might actually exist in the unexplored regions of our world. The mechanical sounds of British Columbia remain unexplained, not because we've ruled out conventional explanations, but because we haven't been able to reach their source. They remind us that in the ocean, hearing something doesn't mean we'll ever get to see what's causing it. Some mysteries remain just out of reach, taunting us with evidence of their existence, while concealing their true nature in darkness or distance. As we continue our journey through the ocean's mysteries, let's examine one of its most visually stunning enigmas, the phenomenon of underwater rivers and lakes. Yes, you heard that correctly. Actual rivers and lakes that exist beneath the ocean's surface. These aren't metaphors or optical illusions, but genuine bodies of water with their own distinct properties, flowing within the larger body of the ocean itself. Off the coast of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, divers discovered what appears to be an actual river, complete with banks, waterfalls, and even overhanging trees formed by underwater vegetation. Known as Cenote Angelita, this underwater river flows for over 100 feet along the ocean floor, with its own current moving independently from the surrounding seawater. The scientific explanation is fascinating. The river is actually a layer of hydrogen sulfide, a product of decomposing organic matter, that's both denser than the surrounding seawater and refracts light differently, creating the perfect visual illusion of a separate flowing body of water. But knowing the science doesn't make the experience any less eerie for divers who can actually swim above this river, watching it flow beneath them while they're already underwater. Even more incredible are the underwater lakes found in the Gulf of Mexico and the Black Sea. These are actual depressions in the seafloor filled with water that's significantly saltier and denser than the surrounding ocean. This hypersaline water creates a distinct surface with waves and ripples, just like a lake on land. These underwater lakes even have their own shorelines and beaches made of mussel shells and accumulated minerals. Animals in the vicinity treat these formations exactly as they would a terrestrial lake. Some creatures swim above them, while others have adapted to live within these super salty underwater pools. What makes these underwater lakes particularly unsettling is that they're often deadly to most marine life. The extreme salinity and high methane content create toxic environments that can kill any creature that swims too deep into their waters. Videos show underwater lakes' shorelines littered with the preserved bodies of crabs and fish that ventured too far and succumbed to the toxic conditions. It's like finding an oasis in the desert, only to discover it's filled with poison. These rivers and lakes within the ocean serve as perfect metaphors for the deceptive nature of the deep. Things aren't always what they appear to be underwater, and what looks familiar from a distance often operates according to alien principles when examined more closely. The ocean creates mirages not of water in a dry land, but of familiar terrestrial features in an already aquatic environment, a reminder that even in the ocean, water can remain a stranger to itself, separating into layers and flows that refuse to mix, maintaining boundaries invisible to the naked eye, but deadly to cross. As our night voyage through the ocean's mysteries continues, let's explore perhaps the most profound enigma of all, the phenomenon of underwater sounds that science simply cannot explain. Beyond the bloop and the other classified noises we discussed earlier, there exists a category of underwater acoustics that defies conventional understanding. Sounds that seem to contain patterns suggesting intelligence but match no known communication system, human or animal. In 1997, the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, recorded a series of underwater sounds near the Antarctic Peninsula that contained mathematical patterns consistent with language. These weren't random noises or the known vocalizations of marine mammals. They followed consistent grammatical structures with repeating elements that linguists associate with syntax, the ordered arrangement of words that allows for meaning in language. But these sounds matched no known language, human or cetacean. They originated from depths where no known intelligent species is believed to live. After analysis eliminated equipment malfunction, human activity, and known animal sources, NOAA classified the recordings as anomalous acoustic data, science's way of saying we have no idea what this is. Similar recordings have emerged from the deepest parts of the Mariana Trench, captured by hydrophones designed to monitor seismic activity. Patterns of clicks, whistles, and low-frequency pulses that follow mathematical progressions, too complex to be random, but don't match any known biological source. Some of these sound patterns appear to receive responses, suggesting some form of communication, but between what and saying what remains entirely unknown. The scientific community remains understandably cautious about such recordings, typically attributing them to either unidentified but conventional marine life, or to complex interactions between ocean currents, geological features, and varying water densities. Yet with each passing year, our catalog of unexplained underwater sounds grows, outpacing our ability to attribute them to known sources. And as our acoustic monitoring technology improves, we're discovering that the ocean is far more vocal than we ever imagined, filled with sounds that don't fit neatly into our established categories. What if the ocean contains forms of intelligence so different from our own that we've been unable to recognize them? Intelligence, not in discrete organisms like ourselves, but distributed through colonies or networks? Communication not through air vibration as on land, but through other mechanisms we're only beginning to detect. The ocean provides the perfect environment for life to evolve along paths entirely different from terrestrial evolution, potentially producing forms of consciousness that operate according to principles we haven't yet grasped. In the darkness of the deep, where visual communication is limited and sound travels for miles, acoustic signals become the primary medium of interaction. The ocean is essentially a vast, three-dimensional auditory network, where messages can travel enormous distances through the right channels. If there are intelligences down there communicating across the abyss, their conversations would sound like nothing we've ever heard before, encoded in patterns we might struggle to recognize as communication at all. And as we listen more closely to the ocean soundtrack, the line between known and unknown, between random noise and potential message, becomes increasingly blurred. Now let's explore one of the most visually stunning and scientifically puzzling ocean phenomena, bioluminescent tides. Imagine walking along a beach at night, when suddenly, with each step you take, the sand beneath your feet erupts in blue-green light. Each wave that crashes onto the shore creates a cascade of glowing blue particles, as if the ocean itself has become filled with stars. This isn't fantasy, it's a natural phenomenon called a bioluminescent tide, caused by massive blooms of single-celled organisms called dinoflagellates. These microscopic creatures produce light through a chemical reaction when disturbed, creating what witnesses describe as one of the most magical experiences in nature. Boats sailing through bioluminescent tides leave glowing wakes that can be seen from shore. Swimmers appear to be coated in ethereal blue fire. Fish swimming beneath the surface create darting trails of light, making the hidden life of the ocean suddenly visible in the darkness. While science understands the basic mechanism of how these organisms produce light, the larger mystery is why these blooms occur when and where they do. Some locations, like the famous Mosquito Bay in Puerto Rico or parts of the Maldives, experience these bioluminescent displays with predictable regularity. But in other areas, these events occur seemingly at random, appearing suddenly and disappearing just as mysteriously. Climate change appears to be altering these patterns, with some historically reliable bioluminescent sites losing their glow while new locations suddenly experience this phenomenon for the first time. What makes bioluminescent tides particularly fascinating is their dual nature. They're simultaneously one of the most beautiful marine phenomena and potentially one of the most ominous. Many bioluminescent blooms are composed of species that produce toxins harmful to fish, humans, and other marine life. Their ethereal glow serves as both a warning and an attraction, a perfect embodiment of the ocean's paradoxical nature. Beauty and danger, illumination and mystery, all intertwined in the same phenomenon. Some researchers have noted that bioluminescent blooms appear to be increasing globally, possibly due to changing ocean temperatures and increased nutrient runoff from human activities. This means more opportunities to witness this spectacular display, but also potentially more toxic algal blooms that can devastate marine ecosystems. It's as if the ocean is responding to human interference by becoming more visibly alive at night, more dramatically present, even as its health may be declining. The growing frequency of these glowing tides might be both a gift and a warning, a reminder that the ocean's most beautiful phenomena often signal deeper changes occurring beneath the surface. As our journey through the ocean's mysteries continues, let's venture into the bewildering world of underwater snow, a phenomenon so strange it challenges our basic understanding of what's possible in the deep. At depths below 4,000 feet, something remarkable begins to happen in our oceans. Organic material from the surface, dead plankton, fish waste, decomposing plants, slowly drifts downward in a constant gentle shower that scientists call marine snow. But this isn't just a poetic name for falling debris. When illuminated by the lights of deep-sea submersibles, these particles genuinely resemble snowflakes, glittering and dancing in the water as they make their long journey to the ocean floor. What makes marine snow truly extraordinary is its role in the deep-sea ecosystem. This constant shower of organic material is the primary food source for creatures living in the lightless depths, where photosynthesis is impossible. Without this steady drift from above, the deepest parts of our oceans would be biological deserts. Instead, they host thriving communities of bizarre and wonderful creatures, all dependent on this invisible connection to the surface world. But here's where the mystery deepens. In certain parts of the ocean, marine snow behaves in ways that defy conventional explanation. Instead of falling straight down as gravity would dictate, it sometimes moves horizontally or even upward, flowing in organized patterns that suggest the influence of forces beyond simple currents. In the Bermuda Triangle region, researchers have documented marine snow forming perfect spirals and geometric patterns as it descends, arrangements so precise they appear almost artificial. Even more puzzling are the occasional reports of marine snow that seems to respond to the presence of research vessels. Submarine pilots and ROV operators have documented instances where snow patterns appear to change direction or density when approached, clustering around lights or equipment in ways that mimic intentional behavior. Most scientists attribute these observations to the complex interaction of currents, lighting conditions, and the observer's perspective. But some researchers have proposed more controversial theories, suggesting that some components of marine snow might not be entirely inanimate. Certain types of marine bacteria can form colonies that behave with surprising coordination, responding to environmental stimuli in ways that blur the line between individual organisms and collective intelligence. Could some forms of marine snow incorporate living networks that respond to their environment, not as passive particles, but as a distributed form of life? The ocean's depths provide the perfect environment for life to evolve along paths entirely different from what we've observed on land, potentially producing entities that exist somewhere between living and non-living, between individual and collective. As we push the boundaries of deep-sea exploration, marine snow remains one of the ocean's most beautiful and enigmatic features, a constant reminder that in the deep, even the most seemingly simple phenomena can harbor complexities and mysteries we're only beginning to understand. What appears to be falling debris in our submersible lights might, from another perspective, be an essential communication network connecting the various layers of the ocean's mysterious depths. Let's plunge deeper now into one of the most frightening mysteries of the ocean, the phenomenon of disappearing islands. Throughout maritime history, maps have been marked with islands that were definitively charted by explorers, only to seemingly vanish without a trace when later expeditions attempted to find them. This isn't ancient history. It's happening even in our modern era of GPS and satellite imaging. Consider the case of Sandy Island, a substantial landmass supposedly located between Australia and New Caledonia in the Coral Sea. This island appeared on maps and global navigation charts for at least 116 years, including Google Maps until 2012. It was approximately 15 miles long and 3 miles wide, not some tiny atoll that could be easily overlooked. And then in November 2012, an Australian research vessel, the Ars for a Southern Surveyor, traveled to the island's recorded position and found nothing. No island, no reef, not even a submerged bank, just open ocean over 4,300 feet deep. Similar cases exist throughout the world's oceans. Bermuda Island in the Gulf of Mexico, a critical reference point for maritime boundaries between the United States and Mexico, completely disappeared sometime in the late 20th century. Extensive searches using modern technology have found no trace of it, despite its appearance on maps dating back to the 16th century. The Thompson Islands near Greenland, repeatedly sighted and charted by explorers between 1622 and 1775, had completely vanished when search expeditions went looking for them in the early 20th century. Conventional explanations for disappearing islands include mapping errors, misidentified icebergs or floating pumice rafts, and islands lost to rising sea levels or seismic activity. But these explanations don't fully account for islands that were observed multiple times by different explorers over centuries before vanishing. Some of these islands were not only mapped but described in detail in ships' logs, with accounts of landings, geographical features, and even encounters with inhabitants. More unsettling theories suggest the possibility of temporary islands, landmasses, that somehow emerge from the deep only to sink back beneath the waves on geological timescales, too rapid for conventional science to explain. Others point to the strange acoustic and gravitational anomalies, sometimes recorded in areas where islands once existed, suggesting that something might still be there, just not in a form our instruments are designed to detect. The case of Isla Bermuda is particularly disturbing because its disappearance conveniently resolved a territorial dispute over potentially oil-rich waters. Did this island truly vanish naturally, or could human intervention have somehow erased it from existence? And if an island the size of Sandy Island can disappear without explanation in an era of satellite surveillance and global tracking, what else might be appearing or disappearing in our oceans without our knowledge? These vanishing islands serve as perfect metaphors for the transient, shifting nature of our knowledge about the ocean. What we think we know, what we've literally put on the map, can still disappear without warning or explanation. The ocean rewrites our certainties, erases our discoveries, and reminds us that even in the age of global surveillance and constant monitoring, it maintains the capacity to make solid land vanish as completely as if it had never existed at all. Now let's explore one of the most enduring mysteries of the deep, the enigma of underwater structures that shouldn't exist according to our conventional understanding of history. Around the world, divers and researchers have discovered what appear to be artificial structures at depths and locations that challenge archaeological timelines. Massive stone blocks arranged in geometric patterns. Apparent roadways and building foundations. Stone circles and alignment markers that suggest astronomical observation points. All found in places where, according to mainstream archaeology, no advanced civilization should have existed. Off the coast of Japan, the Yonaguni Monument features massive terrace structures with straight edges and right angles, appearing too precise to be natural formations. Mainstream science suggests these are unusual but natural sandstone formations, shaped by ancient tectonic activity and erosion. But other researchers point to features that seem deliberately constructed, channels that could be drainage systems, what appear to be carved steps of consistent height and width, and stone pillars placed at regular intervals. If these structures were indeed created by humans, they would have to be at least 10,000 years old, predating the earliest known advanced civilizations in the region by thousands of years. Similar underwater structures have been found in the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, and off the eastern coast of India. In each case, the discovery presents the same fundamental puzzle. Either these are natural formations that coincidentally resemble human architecture, or they represent evidence of advanced civilizations existing thousands of years earlier than our conventional historical timeline allows. And if the latter is true, it means our understanding of human history may be fundamentally incomplete. The implications become even more profound when we consider sea level changes. At the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, sea levels were approximately 400 feet lower than they are today. Vast areas that are now underwater were once dry land, potentially home to civilizations that would have been entirely submerged as the ice caps melted and the oceans rose. If advanced human societies existed during this period, their remains would now lie beneath hundreds of feet of water, largely inaccessible to conventional archaeology. Some researchers have proposed the controversial theory that humanity may have achieved advanced civilization earlier than we thought, only to have much of the evidence literally submerged by rising seas at the end of the last ice age. This would explain certain historical anomalies, sophisticated astronomical knowledge in ancient cultures, references to lost lands in mythology worldwide, and engineering techniques that seem to appear fully formed in the archaeological record, without clear developmental stages. While mainstream archaeology remains skeptical of such interpretations, the underwater structures themselves are undeniably real. Something exists on the ocean floor that resembles artificial construction. The question isn't whether these structures are there, but what they represent: natural formations, evidence of unknown ancient civilizations, or perhaps something else entirely that we haven't yet considered. And as our technology improves, allowing us to map and explore the seafloor in greater detail, more such structures continue to be discovered, each adding another piece to a puzzle we're still struggling to assemble. Let's descend now into one of the most visually stunning mysteries of the deep, the phenomenon of underwater light wheels. For centuries, sailors in the Indian Ocean and South China Sea have reported witnessing enormous wheels of light spinning beneath the surface of the water. These aren't small displays, they're massive illuminated patterns, sometimes over half a mile in diameter, rotating like giant underwater Catherine wheels. The lights typically appear as spokes radiating from a central hub, spinning either clockwise or counterclockwise, creating the impression of an immense luminous wheel turning beneath the ship. These phenomena have been documented by credible witnesses, including naval officers, commercial ship captains, and scientific researchers. A particularly detailed account comes from the USS Lennox in 1910, whose crew observed a light wheel nearly a mile in diameter, with spokes that appeared to be revolving at about 60 revolutions per minute. The lights were bright enough to illuminate the ship's deck and the surrounding ocean. Similar observations have continued into the modern era, with particularly frequent sightings in the waters around Indonesia and Malaysia. The scientific explanation for these light wheels remains incomplete. The leading theory suggests they're caused by bioluminescent organisms responding to underwater disturbances, possibly underwater seismic activity or currents that create circular disturbance patterns. When these disturbances pass through fields of bioluminescent plankton or bacteria, they might create the illusion of rotating spokes of light. But this theory doesn't fully account for the perfect geometric precision often reported, or the consistent rotation speeds that seem too regular for random natural phenomena. Some researchers have proposed more exotic explanations, suggesting the light wheels might be related to electromagnetic phenomena unique to certain areas of the ocean. These regions often lie near geological fault lines, where the Earth's crust is thinner, potentially allowing electromagnetic energy from deep within the planet to interact with seawater in unusual ways. Others point to the curious fact that light wheel sightings often cluster in areas known for other maritime anomalies, including magnetic disturbances and navigational equipment malfunctions. What makes underwater light wheels particularly fascinating is their dual nature as both a documented phenomenon and a symbol of the ocean's capacity for display. The deep creates patterns of light that mimic human inventions: wheels, rotating disks, mathematical spirals, as if reflecting back to us our own technological creations in a language of luminescence. And like many deep ocean phenomena, light wheels occupy that liminal space between the explained and unexplained, between science and wonder. We have theories about what they might be, but witnessing such a display firsthand, a giant wheel of light spinning silently beneath your ship in the middle of the open ocean, would likely feel like encountering something beyond ordinary natural phenomena, something that blurs the boundary between the known world and realms of experience we lack the vocabulary to properly describe. As we continue our night voyage into the ocean's mysteries, let's explore one of its most bizarre physical anomalies, underwater volcanoes that appear to defy the laws of physics. Deep beneath the waves, particularly along the mid-ocean ridges where tectonic plates meet, lie thousands of submarine volcanoes, most of them unmonitored and unexplored. These underwater eruptions should, according to conventional understanding, be dampened and controlled by the immense pressure of the deep ocean. But increasingly, scientists are discovering that some deep-sea volcanoes behave in ways that challenge our basic understanding of volcanology. In 2009, oceanographers studying the Westmata volcano near Samoa witnessed something that shouldn't have been possible: explosive eruptions occurring at depths of nearly a mile underwater. At that depth, the pressure should prevent the explosive expansion of gases that drives violent eruptions on land. Yet Westmata was throwing lava bombs and pyroclastic material with explosive force, despite the crushing pressure surrounding it. The discovery forced scientists to reconsider their models of how underwater volcanoes function. Even more puzzling are the underwater volcanoes that appear to synchronize their eruptions across vast distances. In the South Pacific, researchers have documented cases where submarine volcanoes hundreds of miles apart seem to erupt in coordinated patterns, suggesting some form of communication mechanism between them that science has yet to identify. Some researchers propose that pressure waves traveling through the Earth's crust might allow one eruption to trigger others, creating a domino effect across seemingly unconnected volcanic systems. But the precision of some of these synchronized events suggests something more complex might be occurring. Perhaps the most mysterious aspects of underwater volcanoes are the ecosystems they support. Around hydrothermal vents, where superheated water loaded with minerals erupts from the seafloor, scientists have discovered communities of organisms that shouldn't exist according to conventional biology. These creatures don't rely on sunlight or organic material from the surface. Instead, they derive energy from the chemicals emitted by the vents themselves, through a process called chemosynthesis. These ecosystems represent a form of life so different from surface biology that some researchers suggest they might have evolved independently, potentially representing a second genesis of life on Earth. The water around these volcanic vents can reach temperatures exceeding 700 degrees Fahrenheit, yet remains liquid due to the immense pressure at these depths. In these extreme conditions, organisms have evolved adaptations that would seem miraculous if we hadn't confirmed their existence. There are worms that incorporate minerals from the vents into their bodies, creating protective shells of iron sulfide. Crabs that can withstand temperatures that would instantly cook any surface creature. Bacteria that consume compounds like hydrogen sulfide, which would be lethal poison to most other life forms. These volcanic ecosystems challenge our understanding of where and how life can exist, suggesting that life on Earth is far more adaptable and diverse than we previously imagined. And they raise profound questions about the potential for life on other worlds. If life can thrive in such extreme conditions here on Earth, in complete darkness, under crushing pressure, and in superheated water laden with toxic chemicals, what might be possible on seemingly inhospitable planets elsewhere in our universe? The mysteries of deep-sea volcanoes remind us that the most alien environment we've ever explored isn't in outer space. It's in the lightless depths of our own oceans, where life has found pathways to existence that still leave scientists in awe. Let's now explore one of the ocean's most elusive mysteries, the phenomenon of deep-sea gigantism. In the crushing depths of the ocean, something strange happens to certain species. They grow to sizes far beyond their shallow water relatives. This isn't occasional or random. It's a consistent pattern observed across multiple species groups, suggesting something fundamental about the deep ocean environment promotes excessive growth. Consider the giant isopod, a creature that looks like a roly-poly pill bug you might find in your garden, except it can grow to the size of a house cat. While their surface relatives measure less than an inch, these deep-sea scavengers can reach lengths of over 14 inches. Or the Japanese spider crab, with a leg span that can exceed 12 feet, making it the largest arthropod on Earth. Perhaps most disturbing is the giant amphipod found in the Mariana Trench, a creature similar to the small sandhoppers you might see on the beach, except these deep trench versions grow to nearly a foot long. The conventional scientific explanation for deep-sea gigantism involves several factors: colder temperatures that slow metabolism and extend lifespan, allowing for longer growth periods, reduced predation pressure in the sparsely populated depths, and adaptations to food scarcity that favor larger body sizes capable of covering more territory in search of meals. But these explanations don't fully account for the extreme sizes observed in some species, or why gigantism affects some creatures but not others living in the same environments. Some researchers have proposed more speculative theories, suggesting that the immense pressure of the deep ocean might affect cellular division in ways we don't fully understand, or that unknown properties of water under extreme pressure might allow for more efficient oxygen transport, supporting larger body sizes. Others point to the curious fact that many deep-sea giants resemble prehistoric versions of their modern shallow water relatives, as if the deep ocean somehow preserves body plans that have been lost or reduced in evolutionary history elsewhere. What makes deep-sea gigantism particularly unsettling is the implication that there might be truly enormous specimens of known species lurking in unexplored trenches. If a beach sandhopper can grow to the size of a football in the Mariana Trench, what might happen to other species in depths we haven't yet been able to thoroughly explore? The largest giant squid ever documented was a juvenile female. The largest specimens of many deep-sea fish have been caught by accident rather than through systematic sampling. We simply don't know the upper size limits for many deep ocean species because our exploration has been so limited and our sampling methods so inconsistent. The mystery of deep-sea gigantism reminds us that size itself can become alien when organisms evolve under extreme conditions. What we consider monstrous might simply be an adaptation to an environment so different from our own that it produces results that seem to belong more in science fiction than in natural history. And as we explore deeper, as our technology allows us to witness creatures in their natural habitats rather than hauling damaged specimens to the surface, we may discover that the true giants of the deep exceed even our most fantastic expectations. As our journey through the ocean's mysteries continues, let's explore one of its most controversial enigmas, the phenomenon of underwater UFOs, more technically known as USOs, unidentified submerged objects. For decades, naval personnel, commercial ships, offshore oil platforms, and even submarines have reported encounters with objects moving underwater at speeds that should be physically impossible. Objects that can allegedly accelerate from stationary to hundreds of knots in seconds, without creating the cavitation bubble that should occur at such speeds underwater. Objects that can reportedly transition seamlessly between air and water, descending from the sky into the ocean or emerging from the depths to soar into the atmosphere. One of the most famous incidents occurred in 1967 when the crew of the U.S. Scorpion, a nuclear submarine, reported tracking an unknown object that circled their vessel at speeds exceeding 100 knots. According to declassified Navy documents, the object maintained this speed for over an hour, something no known underwater vehicle could achieve. The Scorpion was lost with all hands several months later under circumstances that remain classified, leading to speculation about whether the USO encounter and the subsequent sinking might have been related. Similar reports have emerged from navies around the world. In 1998, multiple Russian Northern Fleet vessels reported a series of USO encounters in the Barents Sea, with objects diving to depths exceeding 5,000 feet before accelerating horizontally at speeds approaching 200 knots. In 2019, Canadian naval sonar operators recorded acoustic signatures of objects moving at over 150 knots at depths where such speeds should create cavitation bubbles and sonic booms, yet these objects moved in total silence. Conventional explanations for USO sightings include misidentification of natural phenomena, equipment malfunction, or secret military technology being tested in remote ocean regions. But these explanations struggle to account for sightings that predate modern naval technology, or incidents reported by multiple independent vessels simultaneously. They also don't explain the historical consistency of these reports, with similar descriptions appearing in naval archives dating back to World War II and earlier. More exotic theories suggest these objects might represent advanced technology of non-human origin, using principles of physics we haven't yet discovered. Some researchers point to the curious correlation between USO sightings and underwater anomalies, like magnetic fluctuations, unexplained sonar contacts, and electronic equipment failures. These correlations mirror similar patterns reported in atmospheric UFO encounters, suggesting possible connections between phenomena previously considered separate mysteries. What makes underwater UFO reports particularly compelling is the technical sophistication of many of the witnesses. Naval sonar operators, submarine crews, and maritime patrol pilots undergo rigorous training specifically designed to accurately identify underwater objects. When these highly trained observers report encounters that defy conventional explanation, their accounts carry a weight that casual civilian sightings might not. And when these observations are corroborated by sophisticated sensor systems designed specifically to track objects underwater, the mystery deepens beyond simple human error or misperception. The ocean provides the perfect environment for something that doesn't want to be found. It's vast, largely unexplored, and presents formidable barriers to human investigation. Our most advanced submarines can only dive to about 1,600 feet, less than 0.5% of the ocean's maximum depth. And even at these relatively shallow depths, our ability to observe, track, and intercept objects is severely limited by water's natural properties. If there is something sharing our oceans, something with technology beyond our current capabilities, it would have effectively unlimited freedom to operate beneath the waves, appearing only occasionally and briefly to observers on the surface. Whether these USO reports represent misidentified natural phenomena, secret human technology, or something more exotic, they highlight the profound limitations of our understanding and control of the oceanic environment. The sea remains one of the few places on Earth where something truly unknown could still exist, moving through the darkness according to its own purposes, occasionally intersecting with human activity before disappearing back into the vast, unexplored depths. Let's now turn our attention to one of the ocean's most frightening mysteries, the phenomenon of rogue waves. For centuries, sailors returned from voyages with tales of enormous walls of water that would appear suddenly from an otherwise calm sea, towering over their vessels before crashing down with devastating force. These stories were dismissed as nautical tall tales, exaggerations born from the tendency of humans to mythologize their brushes with death. The physics of ocean waves, scientists insisted, made such sudden, isolated giants impossible. And then, on January 1, 1995, scientific instruments on the Dropner oil platform in the North Sea recorded something that shouldn't have existed. A single wave 84 feet high that appeared suddenly from a sea where the average wave height was around 20 feet. The so-called Dropner wave provided the first scientific evidence that rogue waves weren't sailor superstition, but a genuine oceanic phenomenon that defied conventional understanding. Since then, satellite monitoring has confirmed that rogue waves occur far more frequently than traditional wave theory predicted, appearing in oceans around the world under a variety of conditions. What makes rogue waves particularly terrifying is their unpredictability. Unlike tsunamis, which are triggered by seismic events and propagate in consistent ways, rogue waves can form without warning under seemingly normal conditions. They aren't tied to storms or weather patterns in any straightforward way. They can occur in the open ocean, far from any coastline, rising suddenly to heights that would overwhelm even large vessels before disappearing just as mysteriously. A ship can be sailing through relatively calm seas one moment, then face a wall of water 3 or 4 times higher than the surrounding waves. The next, the scientific explanation for rogue waves remains incomplete. Current theories suggest they might form when multiple wave trains intersect and constructively interfere, their peaks combining to create a single massive wave. Others propose that energy can be stolen from surrounding waves through a process called nonlinear focusing, concentrating the ocean's power into a localized area. But these explanations don't fully account for the frequency and distribution of rogue waves observed in recent decades. Some researchers have noted peculiar patterns in rogue wave formation, tendencies for them to appear in certain regions more than others, even when controlling for weather conditions and normal wave activity. These rogue wave hotspots include areas like the South Atlantic, off the coast of South Africa, the North Sea, and parts of the Pacific near Alaska. Curiously, some of these hotspots coincide with regions known for other maritime anomalies, including magnetic deviations and higher rates of ship disappearances. The mystery of rogue waves extends beyond their formation to their impact on maritime history. Looking back through naval records with our new understanding, researchers now believe many unexplained shipwrecks throughout history may have been caused by encounters with these ocean giants. Ships previously thought to have been lost to storms or structural failures may actually have met their end beneath the crushing weight of waves that oceanography of the time insisted couldn't exist. It's a sobering reminder that sometimes the oldest tales of the sea, dismissed for generations as superstition, contain kernels of truth our science is only now beginning to understand. As we continue deeper into the ocean's mysteries, let's explore one of its most mathematically perplexing phenomena, underwater spirals and vortices that appear to follow precise geometric patterns. In certain regions of the ocean, particularly in deeper waters beyond the continental shelf, researchers have documented massive spiral formations that rotate with mathematical precision. These aren't random eddies or current patterns, but organized structures that maintain their form over time periods that defy conventional fluid dynamics. Off the coast of Norway, underwater mapping has revealed a series of perfect logarithmic spirals etched into the seafloor sediment, some spanning miles in diameter. Conventional science suggests these might be formed by the interaction of competing currents or underwater landslides. But their perfect mathematical precision and tendency to appear in locations with no obvious geological explanation has led some researchers to propose more exotic theories. Some have noted the eerie similarity between these deep ocean spirals and certain patterns found in quantum physics, as if principles operating at the subatomic level were somehow manifesting at massive scales in the depths of the sea. Even more puzzling are the geometric vortices discovered in the South Pacific, rotating formations of water that maintain perfect hexagonal structures despite the chaotic environment around them. These formations appear to violate entropy, maintaining their organized state when physical laws suggest they should quickly dissolve into the surrounding water. Some persist for months or even years, visible only through specialized sonar and satellite imagery that can detect subtle temperature and density differences in the deep ocean. The scientific explanations for these phenomena remain incomplete. Some researchers propose they might be related to the Earth's magnetic field interacting with the conductive properties of seawater. Others suggest they could be the visible manifestations of standing waves in the ocean, similar to the patterns that form when sound waves create geometric shapes in fine sand. But these explanations struggle to account for the persistence and precision of the patterns observed. What makes these geometric ocean mysteries particularly fascinating is their connection to ancient human symbolism. The same logarithmic spirals found on the ocean floor appear in artifacts from civilizations around the world, from Celtic carvings to Maori art to ancient Greek architecture. The hexagonal patterns seen in Pacific vortices mirror structures in sacred geometry across multiple cultures. It's as if the deep ocean and the human subconscious are drawing from the same mathematical well, expressing identical patterns in vastly different media. Whether these ocean geometries represent purely physical phenomena we don't yet fully understand, or whether they point to organizing principles in nature that transcend conventional scientific categories, they remind us that the deep sea operates according to patterns and principles that can appear almost supernaturally precise to the human eye. In the darkness of the deep, mathematics itself becomes visible, spiraling and turning according to equations written not in human language, but in the very structure of water and current. Let's delve now into one of the ocean's most disturbing mysteries, the phenomenon of underwater acoustic shadows, areas where sound simply disappears, as if swallowed by something that shouldn't exist. Sound travels remarkably well in water, about 4 times faster than in air, and with less degradation over distance. This property has made sonar the primary tool for mapping and exploring the deep ocean. By sending out sound waves and measuring how they bounce back, we can see structures and objects in even the darkest depths. But occasionally, something goes wrong with this reliable technology. Naval vessels and research ships have documented regions of the ocean where sonar signals simply vanish. Not reflected, not scattered, not attenuated by distance, just gone, as if they've entered a domain where the normal properties of physics no longer apply. These acoustic shadow zones aren't static, they appear to move, sometimes at speeds that would rule out any known marine creature. They can be massive, some extending for miles, or relatively small and concentrated. But in all cases, they represent a fundamental mystery. What could possibly absorb sound so completely that no echo returns? Conventional explanations for acoustic shadows include thermoclines, layers of water with different temperatures that can refract sound waves, and bubble clouds from underwater gas, seeps that might scatter sonar signals. But these explanations don't account for the motion observed in some shadow zones, or their defined boundaries that can be unnaturally sharp and geometric. They also don't explain the tendency for these phenomena to appear in certain oceanic regions with greater frequency, particularly in deep trenches and around underwater mountain ranges. More speculative researchers have proposed that these acoustic shadows might represent something more exotic, regions where the properties of water itself are temporarily altered by unknown forces. Some have suggested connections to the theoretical physics concept of dark fluid, a hypothetical substance that interacts with normal matter primarily through gravitational effects. Others point to potential relationships with magnetic anomalies, often recorded in the same regions, where acoustic shadows appear. What makes acoustic shadows particularly unsettling is their implications for naval operations and ocean exploration. Sonar is our primary means of seeing in the lightless depths. When it fails, we become effectively blind. If there are regions of the ocean where our primary sensing technology doesn't function, what might exist in those blind spots? What might move through those shadows undetectable by our best detection methods? And if these shadows are indeed moving, changing position over time, what does that imply about their nature and origin? The ocean's acoustic shadows remind us that even our most reliable technologies can encounter exceptions and limitations in the extreme environment of the deep. What we consider universal properties of physics, like how sound propagates through water, might have unexpected exceptions in the crushing pressures and eternal darkness of the deep ocean. And in those exceptions, in those moments when our instruments fail and our sensing technologies go blind, the true mysteries of the deep might be hiding, moving silently through realms we can neither see, nor hear, nor ultimately understand with our current scientific framework. As our night journey continues, let's explore one of the most visually haunting mysteries of the ocean, the phenomenon of underwater mirages and false horizons. Deep-sea explorers and submarine crews have reported witnessing impossible sights in the darkness of the deep, ghostly landscapes that appear and disappear, phantom structures that seem solid one moment and dissolve the next, and perhaps most disturbingly, false ocean floors that give way to unexpected abysses when approached. In 1968, the DSV Alvin was conducting a routine mapping operation in the Atlantic when its crew reported seeing what appeared to be an underwater city on the seafloor below them. Dome structures, road-like formations, and what looked like the ruins of massive buildings were clearly visible in the submersible's lights. But when the Alvin descended for a closer look, the entire scene dissolved into ordinary seafloor features, rocks, sand, and marine debris that couldn't possibly have created the complex cityscape they'd observed from above. Similar reports have emerged from other deep-sea expeditions, describing visions of structures, landscapes, and even moving figures that disappear when approached. The scientific explanation for these phenomena centers on the unusual optical properties of deep ocean water. Temperature gradients, salinity differences, and suspended particles can create refraction patterns that distort light in ways similar to desert mirages. The extreme pressure at depth can also affect how light travels, potentially creating illusions that would never form in surface waters. Combined with the psychological effects of operating in the high-stress, sensorially deprived environment of the deep ocean, these factors could potentially explain some underwater mirage sightings. But some reports describe phenomena that stretch these explanations to their limits. Multiple submarine crews have documented experiences with false ocean floors, situations where sonar, cameras, and visual observation all indicate a solid seafloor that suddenly disappears when approached, revealing much greater depths below. These aren't simple visual illusions, but consistent misreadings across multiple sensing technologies, suggesting something more complex than optical refraction might be occurring. Perhaps the most disturbing aspects of underwater mirages are the reports of apparent structures that seem to respond to observation. Deep-sea explorers have described formations that appear to change or move when watched, phantom architectures that reconfigure themselves just at the edge of visibility, and shadowy figures that seem to emerge from and return to the seafloor like ghosts passing through walls. While psychology offers explanations involving pareidolia, the tendency to see meaningful patterns in random stimuli, and the effects of stress on perception, the consistency of these reports across different expeditions and crews, raises questions about whether something more might be happening in the lightless depths. The deep ocean creates the perfect conditions for questioning the reliability of our senses. In an environment where pressure distorts, darkness limits, and isolation affects cognition, the line between observation and hallucination becomes perilously thin. And in that borderland between the seen and the imagined, between measurement and misperception, some of the ocean's most haunting mysteries continue to emerge, visible just long enough to be reported, but never quite tangible enough to be confirmed beyond doubt. Let's dive now into one of the most scientifically puzzling ocean mysteries, the phenomenon of underwater mass migrations that defy conventional biological explanation. Every evening, as the sun sets, the largest migration on the planet begins not on land, but in the ocean depths. Trillions of organisms rise from the deep toward the surface in a synchronized movement so vast it can be detected by sonar as a false bottom that ascends through the water column. These creatures, primarily zooplankton, small fish, and various invertebrates, spend their days in the relative safety of the deep before rising to feed in surface waters under cover of darkness. While this daily vertical migration is well documented, marine biologists have recently discovered more puzzling mass movements that don't follow this predictable pattern. In certain regions of the Pacific and Atlantic, entire deep-sea ecosystems appear to relocate horizontally across vast distances, moving not just individual species, but entire food webs and biological communities. These movements don't correspond to known current patterns, seasonal changes, or food availability. It's as if portions of the deep ocean ecosystem are responding to signals or stimuli we cannot detect, moving with purpose and coordination toward destinations we cannot predict. Even more baffling are the documented cases of species appearing en masse in regions where they've never been recorded before, often in perfect synchronization, despite having no known communication mechanism. In 2017, deep-sea researchers in the Indian Ocean encountered millions of a previously rare jellyfish species, all appearing simultaneously in a region hundreds of miles from their known habitat. These jellies moved in synchronized patterns that suggested coordination beyond the capabilities of their simple nervous systems, creating geometric formations that maintain their structure even as the group navigated around obstacles. Conventional science suggests these phenomena might be explained by undocumented current patterns, responses to subtle chemical signals in the water, or reactions to geomagnetic fluctuations that human instruments fail to detect. But these explanations struggle to account for the precision and apparent intentionality observed in some of these mass migrations. They also don't explain why these movements often cross thermal and pressure boundaries that should act as natural barriers to many deep-sea species. Submarine biologists have proposed more speculative theories, suggesting that deep-sea organisms might possess sensory capabilities we don't yet understand, allowing them to detect and respond to stimuli beyond our current scientific framework. Others point to the possibility of distributed intelligence in marine ecosystems, the idea that collections of relatively simple organisms might generate emergent properties when aggregated in sufficient numbers, creating system-level behaviors that resemble purpose and coordination. What makes these mysterious migrations particularly significant is their potential impact on our understanding of ecology and consciousness. If deep ocean ecosystems can coordinate their movements across vast distances without centralized direction, it suggests forms of information processing and collective decision-making that challenge our current biological models. And if creatures with neural structures far simpler than our own can navigate according to principles we cannot yet detect, what might that imply about the limitations of our own sensory framework and scientific understanding? In the darkness of the deep, life moves according to patterns and principles we're only beginning to document, much less understand. And in that movement, in that synchronized dance of countless organisms responding to inaudible music, some of the ocean's most profound mysteries continue to unfold, visible in our instruments but stubbornly resistant to our explanations. Now let's explore one of the ocean's most persistent historical mysteries, the phenomenon of lost submarines that vanish without explanation. Throughout the history of undersea warfare and exploration, submarines have disappeared under circumstances that defy conventional explanation. These aren't cases of vessels lost to known enemy action or documented mechanical failure, but submarines that simply vanish, often in deep water, frequently without distress signals, sometimes while operating in seemingly perfect conditions. In 1968, the Israeli submarine INS Dakar disappeared while crossing the Mediterranean Sea. Despite one of the largest search operations ever mounted, no trace of the vessel was found until 1999, when its wreckage was finally discovered at a depth of over 9,800 feet. The condition of the wreckage has never been fully explained. The submarine appears to have imploded, yet certain damage patterns are inconsistent with a simple pressure failure. No distress call was ever received, despite the Dakar having multiple communication systems and an experienced crew. The submarine's last known position was hundreds of miles from where the wreckage was eventually found, suggesting it traveled a significant distance after its last communication, potentially under some form of control. Even more baffling is the case of the USS Scorpion, an American nuclear submarine that vanished in 1968 in relatively calm Atlantic waters. When its wreckage was finally located months later, it was found broken in a way that didn't match known implosion patterns. Analysis of acoustic data recorded at the time revealed a series of unusual sounds preceding the submarine's destruction, not the single catastrophic implosion that would indicate a hull failure, but a sequence of smaller events separated by several minutes. This suggests the Scorpion was experiencing a progressive situation rather than a sudden catastrophe, yet no distress call was ever made, despite the apparent time available to do so. Conventional explanations for these losses include undetected mechanical failures, human error, or in some cases, classified enemy action that remains unacknowledged for political reasons. But these explanations struggle to account for the specific circumstances of many disappearances, particularly the lack of distress signals from vessels equipped with multiple backup communication systems, and the unusual damage patterns observed in wreckage that doesn't match known failure modes. More speculative theories point to the possibility of unknown natural phenomena in the deep ocean that might affect submarine systems or structures. Some researchers have noted the correlation between certain submarine disappearances and recorded magnetic anomalies or unusual seismic activity in the same regions. Others have observed patterns in the depth, location, and timing of unexplained losses that suggest factors beyond random mechanical failure might be involved. What makes these cases particularly disturbing is the technological sophistication of the vessels involved. Modern military submarines represent some of the most advanced machines humans have ever created, designed with redundant safety systems and constructed to withstand the extreme conditions of the deep ocean. When these marvels of engineering and their highly trained crews vanish without explanation, it forces us to confront the possibility that there might be forces or phenomena in the deep that can overcome even our most robust technologies and experienced operators. The ocean keeps the secrets of these lost submarines well, revealing only fragments of evidence that raise more questions than they answer. And in the silence that follows each unexplained disappearance, in the absence of final communications or clear explanations, the deep sea reminds us that even in the age of nuclear power and global positioning systems, it remains a realm where human mastery is more illusion than reality. Let's descend now into one of the most visually mesmerizing mysteries of the deep, the phenomenon of underwater rivers, complete with their own waterfalls, banks, and rippling currents, all flowing beneath the ocean itself. These aren't metaphors or optical illusions, but actual rivers of water flowing through water, maintaining their distinct boundaries and behaviors, despite being submerged in the larger ocean around them. Off the coast of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula lies one of the most spectacular examples, a complete underwater river system flowing through the region's extensive cave networks. Divers who visit these formations describe an almost surreal experience, swimming above what looks exactly like a surface river, complete with fallen leaves and debris accumulated along its banks, ripples moving across its surface, and even small waterfalls where the river drops to lower levels. The scientific explanation is fascinating. These rivers form when rainwater seeps through the limestone peninsula, picking up hydrogen sulfide from decaying organic matter. This creates water that's denser than the surrounding seawater and contains different chemical properties. When this dense freshwater meets the ocean in underwater cave systems, it doesn't immediately mix but flows as a distinct layer along the cave floor, creating what appears to be an underwater river. But underwater rivers aren't limited to cave systems or coastal regions. In the deep ocean, particularly along continental slopes, massive underwater rivers, known as density currents, flow for hundreds or even thousands of miles across the seafloor. These aren't small features. Some are larger than the Amazon River, carrying enormous volumes of sediment-laden water through the depths. They carve their own channels in the ocean floor, create their own banks and floodplains, and can even form underwater river deltas, where they eventually dissipate into the surrounding water. What makes these deep ocean rivers particularly mysterious is their unpredictable behavior. Unlike surface rivers that flow consistently, deep-sea density currents can remain stationary for months or years before suddenly activating, flowing powerfully for brief periods, before returning to dormancy. The triggers for these activations remain poorly understood. They don't consistently correlate with storms, seismic activity, or other obvious catalysts. It's as if these rivers decide to flow according to rhythms and patterns we haven't yet deciphered. Even more puzzling are the ecosystem effects of these underwater rivers. Researchers have documented unique biological communities that exist only in association with these formations, species adapted to live specifically at the boundary between the river water and the surrounding ocean. These creatures appear to migrate along with the river's flows, disappearing when the currents are dormant and reappearing when they activate, suggesting they can somehow predict the river's behavior in ways our science cannot. The existence of rivers within the ocean challenges our basic concepts of how water bodies should behave and interact. It creates a kind of recursive natural system, bodies of water within bodies of water, each maintaining their distinct properties and behaviors, despite being composed of the same fundamental substance. And in that recursion, in that ability of water to remain separate from water, based on subtle differences in density and composition, we find a perfect metaphor for the ocean itself, a place where the familiar becomes alien through context, where the basic elements of our world recombine in ways that create entirely new environments and possibilities. As our night journey through the ocean's mysteries continues, let's explore one of its most chemically baffling phenomena, the existence of immortal water, discovered in the deepest ocean trenches. In 2018, researchers analyzing water samples from the Mariana Trench made an astonishing discovery. The water at certain depths contained isotope ratios and chemical signatures, suggesting it had been isolated from the planet's water cycle for over 1 billion years. This ancient water, formed before humans evolved, before dinosaurs walked the Earth, has apparently remained unchanged in composition, while the rest of the planet's hydrosphere has cycled countless times through evaporation, precipitation, and biological processes. The implications of this discovery are profound. Conventional oceanography holds that ocean water mixes completely over periods of about 1,000 years, with currents and upwellings eventually bringing even the deepest water to the surface. The existence of billion-year-old water pockets contradicts this understanding, suggesting that parts of the deep ocean remain completely isolated from the surface world, untouched by the processes we thought affected all of Earth's water. Even more puzzling are the living organisms found in this ancient water. These aren't fossilized remains, but active, living bacteria with genetic structures, unlike anything found in surface waters. Analysis suggests these microbes have evolved in isolation for millions of years, developing unique metabolic pathways and survival strategies adapted to their ancient, isolated environment. Some appear to have reproductive cycles measured in centuries rather than hours or days, suggesting a completely different relationship with time than surface-dwelling organisms. Conventional science suggests these water pockets might be maintained by unique geological formations that physically prevent mixing, or by subtle density and temperature gradients that create impermeable boundaries to water movement. But these explanations struggle to account for the extreme timescales involved. How could any physical barrier maintain its integrity for a billion years on a geologically active planet? More speculative researchers have proposed that these water pockets might represent more than just isolated liquid. They might be portals to a vast, unrecognized reservoir of water within the Earth's mantle, a potential interior ocean containing several times more water than all the surface oceans combined. Recent seismological studies have provided evidence for massive water reserves, deep within the planet, stored not as liquid but bound within the molecular structure of mantle minerals. The ancient water in deep trenches might represent rare points of contact between this interior ocean and the surface world. What makes this immortal water particularly significant is what it might contain beyond unusual bacteria. If portions of Earth's hydrosphere have remained isolated for a billion years, they might preserve chemical signatures of Earth's early atmosphere, traces of extinction events, or even molecular fossils of early life forms that have left no other record in the geological strata accessible to us. They represent a kind of liquid time capsule, preserving conditions and perhaps even entities from Earth's distant past. And as we develop technologies capable of retrieving and analyzing these ancient waters without contamination, we may discover that the deepest history of our planet isn't buried in rock, as we've always assumed, but suspended in liquid, preserved in pockets of the oldest substance on Earth, water that has witnessed the entire evolution of complex life, while remaining untouched by it. Let's explore now one of the most mathematically perplexing mysteries of the deep, the phenomenon of perfect geometric structures found on the ocean floor, formations that appear too precise to be natural, yet exist in locations where human construction should be impossible. Around the world, particularly in very deep waters beyond the continental shelf, sonar mapping has revealed structures with such precise geometric arrangements that they defy conventional geological explanation. Off the coast of Hokkaido, Japan, deep-sea mapping in 2017 discovered a series of perfectly straight lines intersecting at exact 90-degree angles, forming what appears to be a grid pattern spanning several miles along the ocean floor. The lines maintain their precise arrangement, despite crossing varied terrain, including underwater hills and valleys, suggesting they aren't simply cracks in a flat surface. Attempts to sample these formations have been hindered by their extreme depth, over 6,000 feet below the surface, well beyond the range of conventional diving technology. Similar geometric anomalies have been found in the Atlantic, including a massive perfectly circular formation nearly 2 miles in diameter discovered by oil exploration vessels off the coast of Angola. This circle maintains its precise shape, despite spanning a region where the seafloor itself varies in depth by over 100 feet, suggesting it isn't simply a crater or impact site, but something that somehow maintains its geometric integrity, regardless of the underlying topography. Conventional scientific explanations for these formations include previously unknown types of geological processes, such as specialized forms of hydrothermal venting that might create linear deposits, or unusual interaction between ocean currents and the seafloor that could theoretically create geometric patterns in sediment. But these explanations struggle to account for the mathematical precision observed in many of these structures, particularly their tendency toward exact angles and perfectly straight lines over extended distances. More speculative theories suggest these formations might represent evidence of ancient artificial structures, perhaps from civilizations that existed when sea levels were much lower during the last ice age. Others propose even more exotic possibilities, that these geometric patterns might be the visible manifestations of Earth's underlying energy grid, places where the planet's electromagnetic fields create physical effects on the ocean floor through mechanisms we don't yet understand. What makes these geometric ocean mysteries particularly significant is their challenge to our categorical thinking about natural versus artificial structures. We tend to associate perfect geometry, straight lines, exact angles, precise circles, with conscious design and construction. When we find such formations in the deep ocean, it forces us to either expand our understanding of what natural processes can create, or consider the possibility that something with mathematical intelligence has shaped parts of the ocean floor in ways we haven't accounted for in our conventional history or geology. And as our seafloor mapping technology continues to improve, revealing the topography of the deep ocean in ever greater detail, more of these geometric anomalies continue to be discovered. Each one challenges our understanding of what should be possible in the lightless depths. Each one adds another piece to a puzzle we haven't yet assembled into a coherent picture of what might lie hidden beneath miles of water, preserved in the crushing darkness of the deep ocean. As we continue our exploration of the ocean's most haunting mysteries, let's dive into one of its most culturally pervasive enigmas, the legends of Merfolk that persist across virtually every maritime civilization in human history. From the sirens of Greek mythology to the Ningyo of Japanese folklore to the water spirits of indigenous oceanic cultures, stories of half-human, half-fish beings populate the mythological landscape of coastal peoples worldwide. What makes this particular legend so compelling isn't just its universal distribution, but the consistent reports of alleged encounters that continue into the modern era. In 1967, the crew of a British research vessel near the Great Barrier Reef reported observing what they described as a humanoid figure swimming alongside their ship for nearly 10 minutes. The creature reportedly had a fish-like lower body but humanoid torso, arms, and head, and demonstrated behavior that suggested intelligence, including apparent curiosity about the ship and its crew. Similar reports have emerged from scientific expeditions, commercial fishing operations, and naval vessels throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. These aren't typically described as momentary glimpses, but extended observations by multiple witnesses, often including individuals with scientific or technical backgrounds. Conventional explanations for merfolk sightings include misidentification of known marine mammals, like dugongs and manatees, particularly when viewed at a distance or in poor visibility. The upper bodies of these animals can appear surprisingly humanoid when they rise vertically in the water, especially to observers primed by cultural expectations. Other explanations involve optical illusions created by specific combinations of marine animals, kelp formations, or light conditions that might create the impression of a humanoid form in the water. But these explanations struggle to account for detailed observations by experienced mariners and scientists who are presumably familiar with normal marine life. They also don't explain the cross-cultural consistency of merfolk descriptions across societies that had no contact with each other, suggesting either an extraordinary coincidence or some common observational foundation for the myth. Some marine biologists have proposed a more speculative but scientifically grounded theory that merfolk legends might have originated from encounters with human populations affected by specific genetic conditions. The condition known as sirenomelia or mermaid syndrome causes the legs to fuse together, creating an appearance similar to the traditional mermaid tail. In modern times, this condition is typically fatal shortly after birth, but some researchers suggest that in isolated coastal populations, genetic adaptations might have allowed affected individuals to survive. Combined with cultural practices of living partially in water, as some coastal societies still do, this could potentially create the impression of a distinct semi-aquatic humanoid population. What makes merfolk legends particularly significant is their potential connection to humanity's evolutionary history. The aquatic ape hypothesis, while controversial in mainstream anthropology, suggests that humans may have gone through a semi-aquatic phase during our evolutionary development. Proponents point to unique human characteristics, like subcutaneous fat distribution, controlled breathing, and hairlessness, that more closely resemble aquatic mammals than other primates. Could merfolk legends represent cultural memories of a time when some human populations were more adapted to aquatic environments than others? Whether merfolk exist in any literal sense or represent a complex interplay of misidentification, cultural transmission, and perhaps encountering human populations with different adaptations or practices, their legends remind us that the boundary between human and ocean has always been more permeable in our collective imagination than our terrestrial nature might suggest. And in that permeable boundary, in that persistent human wonder about whether we might share our oceans with something like ourselves, yet fundamentally different, some of the sea's most enduring mysteries continue to capture our imagination. Let's now explore one of the ocean's most profound temporal mysteries, the phenomenon of deep-sea time anomalies, where clocks and timekeeping devices behave in ways that defy our understanding of physics. Throughout the history of deep-sea exploration, submarine crews, research vessels, and underwater habitats have reported inexplicable discrepancies in timekeeping, instances where highly accurate chronometers suddenly run fast or slow, where multiple synchronized clocks diverge from each other, or where electronic timing systems experience unexplained jumps or gaps. In 1972, the deep-sea research vessel Alvin was conducting operations at approximately 3,000 feet when its crew noticed something extraordinary. The 3 atomic clocks aboard, installed specifically for experimental precision, had desynchronized by several milliseconds. This shouldn't have been possible given their design and the short duration of the dive. More disturbingly, when the vessel returned to the surface, the clocks resynchronized to the correct time with no explanation for their temporary divergence. Similar incidents have been reported by military submarines operating at extreme depths, with navigation systems that rely on precise timing suddenly experiencing temporal discrepancies that resolve once the vessel returns to shallower waters. The scientific explanation for these phenomena remains incomplete. Some researchers suggest extreme pressure might affect the oscillation of crystals and electronic timekeeping devices, or that intense magnetic anomalies found in certain deep-sea regions could potentially influence atomic processes. But these explanations struggle to account for the temporary nature of these effects, or why they would simultaneously affect different types of timekeeping technologies operating on different principles. More speculative theories draw connections to Einstein's theory of relativity, which establishes that gravity can affect the passage of time. At extreme ocean depths, the combined gravitational effects of being both deep within Earth's gravitational well and surrounded by the massive weight of water above could theoretically create measurable time dilation effects. But conventional physics suggests these effects should be far too small to detect with current technology, raising questions about what might be amplifying them in deep ocean environments. What makes deep-sea time anomalies particularly significant is their implication for our understanding of fundamental physical constants. If time itself can fluctuate or flow differently in the deep ocean, what other physical constants might prove variable under extreme conditions? And if our most sophisticated timekeeping technologies can be affected by whatever forces are at work in the depths, what might that imply about other instruments and measurements we rely on to understand the deep sea? These temporal mysteries suggest that the deep ocean might represent more than just a physical frontier. It might be a place where our basic understanding of physics encounters its limits, where the rules that govern reality as we experience it on the surface begin to shift or transform under extreme conditions. And in that transformation, in those moments when even time itself seems to become fluid and variable, we glimpse perhaps the most profound mystery of all, that our understanding of reality is built on assumptions that the deep ocean might not always honor. The deepest parts of our oceans may operate according to physical principles we've yet to fully comprehend, where the very fabric of time and space responds differently to forces we cannot easily measure or observe. Time anomalies represent just one aspect of a larger pattern of unexplained phenomena that cluster around the extreme environments of the deep sea. These anomalies remind us that despite our technological advances, despite our scientific confidence, the deep ocean remains a place where certainty dissolves like salt in water, where the rules we've carefully constructed to explain our world might be just surface approximations of deeper, stranger truths waiting in the abyss below. Let's now turn our attention to one of the most hauntingly beautiful mysteries of the deep, the phenomenon of eternal microorganisms that appear to defy the fundamental law of mortality. In 2013, scientists drilling core samples from the seabed beneath the South Pacific Gyre made an astonishing discovery. In sediment layers dating back over 100 million years, they found bacteria that were not fossilized remains, but living organisms in a state of suspended animation. When brought to the surface and provided with nutrients, these ancient microbes awakened from their seemingly eternal slumber and began to metabolize and reproduce. These weren't specialized extremophiles evolved specifically for dormancy, but ordinary marine bacteria that had somehow survived in a metabolically inactive state for time periods that dwarf human comprehension. Conventional science struggles to explain how any living organism, even a single-celled bacterium, could remain viable for such extraordinary time spans. The metabolic processes that define life should have broken down the cellular components over millions of years, even in a dormant state. Yet these ancient sleepers retained their biological integrity across geological epochs, through mass extinctions, through the rise and fall of entire ecosystems above them. Even more puzzling are the signs that these bacteria weren't completely dormant during their entombment. Isotopic analysis suggests they maintained some minimal level of metabolism, not enough to be considered fully active life, but not complete biological stasis either. They existed in a third state that our biology doesn't have a proper category for, something between living and non-living, between active and dormant. Some researchers have proposed that these eternal microbes might represent a fundamentally different relationship with time than surface organisms. While life as we understand it is defined by birth, growth, reproduction, and death occurring within a relatively compressed time frame, these deep-sea bacteria appear to operate on a radically extended temporal scale. Their life cycles might unfold over millions of years rather than hours or days, with periods of activity so minimal and changes so gradual that they become imperceptible by our standards of measurement. What makes these eternal microorganisms particularly significant is their implication for how we define life itself. If an organism can exist in this twilight state between activity and dormancy for 100 million years, is it experiencing time in a way that fundamentally differs from our understanding? And if life can persist in this manner in the protected environment of deep-sea sediments, could similar processes allow biological preservation in other extreme environments, in the frozen subsurface of Mars, for instance, or in the hypothesized subsurface oceans of icy moons like Europa or Enceladus? The eternal microbes of the deep seabed challenge our most basic assumptions about the temporal limits of biological existence. They suggest that life, once established, might be nearly impossible to truly extinguish if given the right conditions for preservation. And in their impossibly extended lifespans, in their ability to bridge vast geological eras through periods of near stasis, they remind us that our human experience of time, our brief, brilliant flicker of conscious awareness, represents just one way of moving through the temporal dimension. The deep ocean, with its crushing pressure and near-freezing temperatures, creates conditions where time itself seems to flow differently for the life adapted to its extreme environment. Now let's explore one of the ocean's most persistent ecological mysteries, the phenomenon of deepwater oases, isolated ecosystems that shouldn't exist according to conventional understanding. Throughout the world's oceans, researchers have discovered self-contained biological communities thriving in the deep sea, completely disconnected from surface ecosystems and sunlight-dependent food chains. These aren't the now famous hydrothermal vent communities powered by chemosynthesis, but something more puzzling, vibrant ecosystems existing in areas with no apparent energy source, no thermal vents, no methane seeps, no obvious way to sustain the abundant life they contain. In 2018, a research expedition in the South Atlantic discovered such an oasis nearly 12,000 feet beneath the surface, a thriving community of corals, sponges, crustaceans, and fish, all existing in an area with no detectable energy input from either the surface or the seafloor. The biomass concentration was nearly 100 times greater than the surrounding deep-sea environment, creating the appearance of a verdant island in an otherwise sparse abyssal plain. Conventional science struggles to explain how these isolated ecosystems maintain their energy balance. The food webs seem closed and self-sustaining, yet the fundamental laws of thermodynamics tell us that all biological systems require external energy input to counter entropy. Without photosynthesis or chemosynthesis, where is this energy coming from? Some researchers have proposed that these oases might be powered by extremely slow cycling nutrients, perhaps accumulated over thousands of years from the minute organic particles that drift down from surface waters. Others suggest they might draw energy from subtle geothermal sources too diffuse to be easily measured, or from chemical processes occurring within deep sediment layers. But these explanations struggle to account for the abundance and diversity observed in many of these isolated communities. Even more puzzling is the genetic distinctiveness of species found in these deep-sea oases. Many appear to have been isolated from their nearest relatives for millions of years, evolving independently despite the absence of obvious physical barriers that would prevent mixing with the surrounding deep-sea environment. It's as if these communities exist in their own biological bubble, genetically and ecologically separate from the rest of the ocean, despite being physically connected to it. Submarine biologists have proposed more speculative theories, suggesting these oases might represent the last remnants of ancient ecosystems that once dominated the deep sea when ocean conditions were different. Others point to the possibility that they might be maintained by energy sources we haven't yet identified, perhaps drawing from the Earth's electromagnetic field or from subtle quantum effects that become significant in the extreme conditions of the deep ocean. What makes these deepwater oases particularly significant is their implication for how life might exist in other extreme environments, both on Earth and potentially on other worlds. If biological communities can develop self-sustaining ecosystems in the energy-poor environment of the deep sea, similar adaptations might allow life to persist in other seemingly inhospitable environments, in subglacial lakes, in deep crustal fractures, or even in the subsurface oceans of icy moons, elsewhere in our solar system. These isolated biological islands in the deep challenge our understanding of life's requirements and adaptability. They suggest that once established, life finds ways to persist even when cut off from the energy flows that we consider essential, developing novel solutions to the fundamental problem of survival in extreme isolation. And in their mysterious self-sufficiency, in their ability to flourish where conventional biology says they shouldn't, they remind us that life's adaptability may exceed our current scientific frameworks for understanding it. Let's venture now into one of the most visually stunning mysteries of the deep, the phenomenon of ghost spirals, massive luminous formations that appear in the abyssal depths only to vanish without explanation. First documented by deep-sea submersibles in the 1980s, these enormous spiral patterns of pale blue-green light can span hundreds of feet in diameter, rotating slowly in the darkness of the deep ocean. Unlike bioluminescent displays created by known organisms, Ghost spirals maintain perfect geometric precision, with arms that curve according to the exact mathematical formula of the logarithmic spiral, the same pattern found in galaxies, hurricanes, and certain seashells. What makes these formations particularly puzzling is their behavior. They appear suddenly in the darkness, maintain their precise spiral structure while rotating for periods ranging from minutes to hours, and then fade away as mysteriously as they arrived. No known marine organism or collection of organisms creates light displays with this level of geometric precision or temporal duration. Conventional scientific explanations have included suggestions that these might be complex interactions of bioluminescent plankton responding to underwater current patterns or previously unknown colonial organisms that coordinate their light production. But these explanations struggle to account for the mathematical precision of the spirals and their tendency to appear in regions with minimal current or other external stimuli that might organize such displays. Even more baffling is that ghost spirals tend to appear in clusters, with multiple formations manifesting simultaneously across distances too great for any obvious coordination mechanism. In 2009, a research vessel in the Philippine Trench recorded 7 distinct spirals appearing simultaneously spread across nearly 5 miles of open water, all rotating in perfect synchronization, despite the physical separation between them. Some researchers have proposed more speculative theories, suggesting these spirals might represent visible manifestations of electromagnetic phenomena in the deep ocean, perhaps related to the interaction between Earth's magnetic field and the conductive properties of seawater under extreme pressure. Others point to possible connections with the deep scattering layer, a mysterious zone in the ocean where sonar signals are reflected and scattered by something that rises toward the surface at night and descends during the day. What makes ghost spirals particularly significant is their suggestion that the deep ocean may harbor phenomena that blur the line between the biological and the physical. If these are created by living organisms, they demonstrate a level of geometric precision and coordination far beyond what we typically associate with marine life. If they're physical phenomena, they represent patterns of energy or matter that mimic the organizational principles we typically associate with biological systems. In either case, they challenge our tendency to categorize natural phenomena as clearly biological or clearly physical, suggesting that in the extreme environment of the deep ocean, these distinctions might become less absolute. And in their perfect mathematical form, in their mysterious appearance and disappearance, ghost spirals remind us that the language of nature at its most fundamental level might be mathematics itself, patterns of energy and information that manifest in similar ways across vastly different scales and systems, from subatomic particles to galactic superclusters, with the deep ocean providing a uniquely suitable environment for these patterns to become momentarily visible to human observation. As our journey through the ocean's mysteries continues, let's explore one of its most disturbing temporal anomalies, the phenomenon of time bubbles reported by deep-sea researchers and submersible crews. Throughout the history of deep-sea exploration, there have been reports of localized areas where time appears to flow at different rates than the surrounding environment. Submarine crews describe passing through regions where clocks temporarily run at different speeds, where biological processes seem accelerated or slowed, and where subjective perception of time becomes noticeably altered. In 1978, the crew of the DSV Alvin reported experiencing what they described as a time pocket while exploring a deep canyon in the Caribbean. For approximately 20 minutes, the 3 chronometers aboard the vessel recorded time at different rates, with discrepancies of several seconds between devices that should have remained precisely synchronized. More unsettling was the crew's report that their subjective experience of time seemed stretched, with what felt like hours of experience somehow compressed into minutes of objective time once they exited the anomalous region. Similar reports have emerged from other deep-sea expeditions, with particularly frequent occurrences in regions with unusual geomagnetic properties or extreme depth gradients. The scientific explanation for these experiences remains elusive. Some researchers suggest they might result from the physiological effects of high pressure on human neurology, potentially altering perception without actually changing the flow of time itself. Others point to the possibility that strong magnetic anomalies in certain deep-sea regions might temporarily affect the operation of both mechanical and electronic timing devices, creating the illusion of temporal distortion. But these explanations struggle to account for cases where multiple independent systems, human perception, mechanical chronometers, and electronic timekeeping all experience synchronized temporal anomalies that resolve once the vessel moves to a different location. More speculative theories draw on concepts from theoretical physics, particularly the idea that gravity can influence the rate at which time passes. In the extreme pressure environment of the deep ocean, with the combined gravitational effects of massive water columns and proximity to underwater geological features, could there be localized warping of spacetime sufficient to create measurable temporal effects? Most physicists would consider such effects far too small to detect with current technology, but the persistent reports from deep-sea explorers suggest something unusual may be occurring. What makes these temporal anomalies particularly significant is their implication for our understanding of time itself. If time can flow at different rates in localized regions of the deep ocean, what does that tell us about the nature of what we consider one of the most fundamental and invariant dimensions of reality? And if human perception can detect these variations, how might organisms that have evolved in the deep sea over millions of years have adapted to or even utilized these temporal fluctuations? The reports of time bubbles in the deep challenge our assumption that time flows uniformly throughout our world. They suggest that under extreme conditions that exist permanently in the deep ocean, our most basic frameworks for understanding reality might require revision. And in those moments of temporal distortion, in those experiences where time itself seems to become malleable and variable, we glimpse perhaps the most profound mystery of all, that our perception of time as a constant, linear flow might be just another surface-level approximation that dissolves when we venture into the extreme environments of the deep. Let's plunge now into one of the ocean's most frightening acoustic mysteries, the phenomenon of submarine shrieks, unexplained high-frequency sounds that have terrified deep-sea explorers and defied scientific explanation for decades. Unlike the low-frequency sounds like the bloop that we discussed earlier, submarine shrieks occupy the upper range of human hearing, piercing, metallic wails that rise and fall in patterns too complex and varied to be explained by known geological or biological processes. What makes these sounds particularly disturbing is their apparent response to human presence. Submersible crews report that the shrieks often begin shortly after their vessels enter certain deep-sea regions, appear to track their movement, and sometimes change in tone or intensity when the craft alters course or operations. This creates the unsettling impression of something aware, something responsive, something potentially vast hidden in the surrounding darkness. In 1997, the Russian research vessel Akademik Mstislav Keldysh was conducting deep-sea exploration in the Pacific when its crew and scientists experienced one of the most thoroughly documented cases of submarine shrieks. The sounds began at a depth of approximately 3,000 meters, initially faint but gradually increasing in volume and complexity as the vessel's submersibles descended further. Multiple hydrophones recorded the phenomenon from different positions, eliminating the possibility of equipment malfunction or localized effects. The sounds persisted for nearly 40 minutes, changing in pattern when the submersibles activated their external sampling equipment, almost as if responding to their actions. Conventional scientific explanations have included suggestions that these might be previously undocumented vocalizations of deep-sea creatures, perhaps forms of communication used by unknown species of whales or other marine mammals. Others propose they could result from complex interactions between ocean currents and geological features, creating resonance patterns that coincidentally resemble purposeful sound. But these explanations struggle to account for the apparent responsiveness of the shrieks to human activity and their tendency to follow moving vessels rather than remaining fixed to a geographical location, as would be expected from geological sources. Some researchers have proposed more speculative theories, suggesting the sounds might be produced by forms of marine life, so different from known species that we have no proper category for them, perhaps vast colonial organisms with distributed nervous systems that can sense and respond to intruders in their territory. Others point to the possibility that these might not be biological or geological at all, but manifestations of phenomena we don't yet understand, perhaps related to the interaction between electromagnetic fields and seawater under extreme pressure conditions. What makes submarine shrieks particularly significant is the emotional response they provoke in even the most experienced deep-sea explorers. Hardened submarine crews and scientific researchers alike report feelings of primordial fear when exposed to these sounds, not the rational caution that might accompany unusual phenomena, but a deep, instinctive dread that seems wired into the human nervous system. It's as if something in these acoustic patterns triggers recognition at a level below conscious thought, activating ancient survival circuitry evolved long before humans became the planet's dominant species. And in that visceral response, in that instinctive recognition of something that should not be, we find perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this mystery. The possibility that our bodies might remember threats our minds have forgotten, predators our species once knew, but our science has not yet rediscovered. The deep ocean, with its crushing pressure and eternal darkness, provides the perfect environment for something ancient to persist unchanged, while life on the surface evolved and transformed. And the shrieks that occasionally penetrate that darkness might be messages from a world and time we thought long vanished, calling to us with voices we still somehow recognize, despite the vast gulfs of evolutionary time that separate us from whatever might be calling. Now let's explore one of the most mathematically perplexing mysteries of the deep, the phenomenon of deep-sea prime spirals. Enormous formations on the ocean floor that follow the numerical pattern of prime numbers. First discovered through sonar mapping in the 1990s, these massive spiral patterns have been found etched into the seafloor in several deep ocean basins, most notably in the South Pacific and the North Atlantic. What makes these formations truly extraordinary is their mathematical precision. When measured from their centers, the spiral arms occur at distances that precisely correspond to prime numbers, those that can only be divided by themselves in 1. The first arm at 2 units from center, the second at 3, the third at 5, the fifth at 11, and so on, following the exact sequence of prime numbers with deviations of less than 0.1%. Such precision over distances spanning miles seems impossible for any known natural process to create. Conventional geological explanations have attempted to attribute these formations to complex interactions between underwater currents, seafloor topography, and sediment distribution. Others suggest they might result from previously unknown types of underwater volcanic activity or the effects of localized magnetic anomalies on how sediment settles on the ocean floor. But these explanations struggle to account for the mathematical specificity of the patterns. Natural processes might create spirals, as we see in whirlpools, hurricanes, and certain growth patterns, but there's no known physical process that would specifically encode the sequence of prime numbers into a geological formation. Even more puzzling is that these prime spirals appear to be relatively recent formations. Sediment analysis suggests many were created within the past few thousand years, with some potentially forming within just the last few centuries. This rules out ancient civilizations or prehistoric geological events as potential causes, placing their creations squarely within historical times when human technology was nowhere near capable of manipulating the seafloor at such scales. Some researchers have proposed more speculative theories, suggesting these patterns might represent a form of communication, perhaps from non-human intelligence or from human civilizations, with capabilities far beyond what conventional history acknowledges. Prime numbers, after all, are often considered a potential universal language, recognizable to any intelligence capable of mathematics, regardless of their biological or cultural origin. Others point to the possibility that these might be the visible manifestations of fundamental physical or mathematical principles operating at scales and in environments we don't typically observe, perhaps related to standing wave patterns in Earth's magnetic field or other global phenomena that become visible only in the relatively stable environment of the deep seafloor. What makes deep-sea prime spirals particularly significant is their challenge to our understanding of the relationship between mathematics and physical reality. We typically think of mathematical patterns as human abstractions that we use to describe the world, not as physical formations embedded in the world itself. Yet here are patterns encoding one of the most fundamental sequences in number theory, physically etched into the planet at scales that dwarf human engineering capabilities. These formations raise profound questions about whether mathematics is truly a human invention or a discovery of patterns inherent in reality itself, patterns that might manifest physically under certain conditions, even without conscious intervention. And in their precise encoding of prime numbers, in their mysterious appearance on the ocean floor, far from human observation, these spirals suggest that the language of the cosmos might be mathematical at its very foundation, a universal syntax written not just in the stars and subatomic particles, but in the mud and rock of the deep ocean floor. Let's descend now into one of the ocean's most perplexing biological mysteries, the phenomenon of immortal jellyfish and their bizarre relationship with the deep sea. In 1988, marine biologists made an astonishing discovery, a species of jellyfish, Turritopsis darni, that appeared capable of reversing its life cycle, transforming from its mature medusa stage back to its juvenile polyp stage when faced with environmental stress or physical damage. This biological reversal is equivalent to a butterfly turning back into a caterpillar, something previously thought impossible in complex multicellular organisms. More extraordinary still, this rejuvenation process can apparently repeat indefinitely, suggesting that these creatures might be biologically immortal, capable of escaping death through a perpetual cycle of regression and redevelopment. What makes this phenomenon particularly mysterious is the relationship between these immortal jellyfish and the deep ocean. Research has shown that the rejuvenation process is most commonly triggered when the jellyfish descend to significant depths, particularly during their seasonal migrations. Something about the extreme conditions of the deep, the pressure, the darkness, the cold, or some combination of these factors, appears to activate the cellular processes that enable this remarkable transformation. Even more puzzling is what happens to these creatures in the deepest parts of the ocean. Turritopsis specimens collected near the surface show signs of aging and cellular damage despite their regenerative capabilities. But specimens retrieved from extreme depths exhibit cellular structures that appear pristine, with none of the degradation typically associated with biological aging. It's as if the deep ocean environment not only triggers their rejuvenation process, but enhances it beyond what occurs in shallower waters. Conventional science struggles to explain why the deep sea environment would have this effect. Some researchers suggest that increased pressure might activate certain cellular pathways involved in the rejuvenation process, or that specific combinations of trace elements more abundant in deep water might catalyze the transformation. But these explanations don't fully account for the apparent preservation effect the deep ocean seems to have on these organisms, allowing them to maintain cellular integrity beyond what's observed in any other natural environment. Some marine biologists have proposed more speculative theories, suggesting the extreme conditions of the deep ocean might create a kind of suspended animation effect, dramatically slowing biological processes, including those associated with cellular degradation. Others point to the possibility that something in the deep sea environment might shield these organisms from cosmic radiation or other factors that contribute to genetic damage and aging in surface-dwelling creatures. What makes the immortal jellyfish particularly significant is what they might tell us about the fundamental nature of biological mortality. Death has typically been viewed as an inevitable consequence of complex life, with aging and cellular degradation built into the very machinery of multicellular organisms. Yet here is a creature that appears to have found a loophole in that seemingly universal law, a pathway back from the brink of death that may allow it to persist indefinitely. And the fact that this pathway is somehow enhanced by the deep ocean environment suggests there may be properties of that extreme realm that fundamentally alter what we consider biological inevitabilities. Could the deep sea, with its crushing pressure and near-freezing temperatures, somehow interrupt the processes that lead to cellular death? Could other organisms have developed similar adaptations that we haven't yet discovered, creating a deep ocean ecosystem where mortality itself operates differently than it does in the familiar surface world? The immortal jellyfish and their relationship with the deep challenge are most basic assumptions about the limits of biological life. They suggest that even something as seemingly fundamental as death might be more negotiable than we've believed, particularly in environments so different from those where our understanding of biology first developed. And in their cyclical regeneration, in their descent into the depths to renew themselves, they offer a tantalizing glimpse of biological possibilities beyond our current scientific frameworks, possibilities where the line between life and death becomes as fluid and permeable as the creatures themselves. Let's explore now one of the ocean's most persistent and chilling mysteries, the phenomenon of underwater voices, unexplained sounds recorded in the deep that bear unsettling resemblances to human speech. Since the 1950s, when hydrophone technology first became sophisticated enough for detailed deep ocean monitoring, researchers have occasionally captured audio recordings that contain patterns eerily similar to human vocalization. These aren't the known sounds of marine mammals or the mechanical noises of submarines or research equipment, but something that occupies an uncanny valley between recognizable speech and alien utterance. What makes these recordings particularly disturbing is their structural similarity to human language. Linguistic analysis has identified features common to human speech patterns, consistent phoneme-like units, rhythmic variations similar to stressed and unstressed syllables, and even cadences that resemble questioning or declarative statements. Yet these patterns don't match any known human language, living or dead. In 1997, an array of hydrophones monitoring seismic activity near the Mariana Trench captured one of the most analyzed examples of this phenomenon. For approximately 8 minutes, a sequence of sounds was recorded that contained what appeared to be over 30 distinct phonemes organized into repeating patterns consistent with language-like communication. The sounds occurred at depths where no known human activity was taking place, and at frequencies that would be nearly impossible for human vocal cords to produce, especially underwater. Conventional scientific explanations have attempted to attribute these recordings to previously undocumented vocalizations of marine mammals, perhaps forms of communication used by deep-diving species we've rarely encountered. Others suggest they might result from complex interactions between ocean currents and geological features, creating resonance patterns that coincidentally resemble speech. But these explanations struggle to account for the linguistic structures identified in the recordings, the consistent patterns and organizational principles that linguists associate with true language rather than random or purely instinctive vocalization. Some researchers have proposed more speculative theories, suggesting these might represent communication from unknown species with intelligence comparable to or exceeding humans, perhaps deep-sea organisms that have evolved in isolation for millions of years. Others point to the possibility that these might be something else entirely, perhaps acoustic manifestations of phenomena we don't yet understand, or even echoes of human activity, somehow preserved or transformed by the unique acoustic properties of the deep ocean. What makes underwater voices particularly significant is their challenge to our understanding of intelligence and communication on our own planet. If these are indeed forms of language used by non-human entities, it would force a radical reconsideration of how intelligence has evolved on Earth and what forms it might take beyond the familiar surface-dwelling species we've studied. The deep ocean, with its extreme isolation and radically different environmental pressures, could have fostered the evolution of intelligence along pathways entirely different from those that led to human consciousness. And in the darkness of the deep, where vision is limited and sound travels for miles, acoustic communication would be the natural medium for such intelligence to express itself. Perhaps most unsettling is the possibility that such intelligence might have existed alongside us for millions of years, evolving and developing in the vast, unexplored realm that covers most of our planet, occasionally intersecting with human activity, but remaining largely separate and unknown. The recordings of what seem like voices from the deep challenge our assumption that if intelligent life existed on Earth besides humans, we would certainly know about it. They suggest that our exploration of our own planet remains so incomplete that we cannot rule out the possibility of sharing Earth with other minds, other perspectives, other forms of consciousness that operate in environments so alien to our own that we've barely begun to properly search for them. And in those haunting, speech-like patterns captured by hydrophones in the darkest depths, we may be hearing not just unusual sounds, but potential messages from a parallel world of intelligence that has developed beneath the waves, occasionally sending communications we can detect but have not yet learned to comprehend. As our night voyage through the ocean's mysteries continues, let's venture into one of its most visually captivating enigmas, the phenomenon of deep-sea snow forests, vast regions where marine snow forms patterns resembling terrestrial woodlands. Marine snow, as we discussed earlier, consists of organic particles drifting down from surface waters, dead plankton, fish waste, and other biological material that serves as a critical food source for deep-sea ecosystems. Typically, this material falls in a random pattern, distributing resources relatively evenly across the abyssal plain. But in certain regions of the deep ocean, particularly near underwater mountain ranges and along the edges of continental shelves, something extraordinary happens. The marine snow begins to aggregate in vertical columns that bear a striking resemblance to trees, complete with trunk-like central structures and branch-like extensions that sway gently in the ocean currents. These columns can reach heights of over 30 feet, creating the appearance of underwater forests stretching across miles of seafloor. Conventional scientific explanations suggest these formations might result from complex interactions between ocean currents, bacterial activity that causes particles to stick together, and the influence of geological features on deep-sea water movement. Others propose they might be shaped by the feeding activities of filter-feeding organisms that create currents pulling marine snow into these distinctive patterns. But these explanations struggle to account for the remarkable stability of these structures over time. Unlike surface forests that develop over decades through the growth of individual trees, these marine snow forests form and reform continuously as new particles descend from above. Yet they maintain their forest-like structure with remarkable consistency, suggesting organizing principles beyond simple current patterns or random aggregation. Even more puzzling is the ecological role these formations appear to play. Research has shown that the biodiversity in areas containing snow forests is significantly higher than in surrounding regions, with unique species assemblages that don't occur elsewhere in similar depth zones. It's as if these formations create their own distinct ecological niches, supporting communities specifically adapted to this unusual environment. Some marine biologists have proposed more speculative theories, suggesting these snow forests might represent a form of ecosystem engineering by deep-sea organisms, not just a response to physical forces, but an actively created structure that serves specific biological purposes. Others point to the possibility that these might be visible manifestations of subtle electromagnetic or quantum effects that become significant in the deep ocean environment, perhaps related to the Earth's magnetic field or other global phenomena that influence how particles aggregate in the water column. What makes deep-sea snow forests particularly significant is their parallel to terrestrial ecosystems, despite evolving in a radically different environment. That such similar structures would develop independently in the darkness of the deep ocean, created from completely different materials through entirely different processes, suggests there may be underlying organizational principles in nature that transcend specific environmental conditions. These deep-sea forests, with their vertical structure and branching patterns, may represent not just coincidental similarities to land forests, but the emergence of optimal forms for energy and resource distribution that nature discovers repeatedly across vastly different contexts. And in their ethereal beauty, in their ghostly resemblance to the familiar forests of the surface world, these marine snow formations remind us that the patterns of life may be more universal than we've realized, architectural solutions to the fundamental problems of existence that emerge wherever sufficient complexity allows, whether in the sunlit world we know or in the eternal midnight of the deep ocean. Let's now explore one of the ocean's most perplexing archaeological mysteries, the phenomenon of deep-sea stone spheres, perfectly round rock formations found at depths where human intervention should be impossible. Throughout the world's oceans, particularly in the deepest trenches and abyssal plains, researchers have discovered stone spheres of various sizes, from a few inches to several feet in diameter. What makes these formations truly extraordinary is their geometric precision. Many are nearly perfect spheres, with deviations of less than 0.1% from ideal roundness, a level of accuracy that would be challenging to achieve even with modern stoneworking technology. Yet these objects have been found at depths exceeding 20,000 feet, in locations thousands of miles from any historical human habitation, often partially embedded in sediment layers, suggesting they've been there for thousands or even millions of years. Conventional geological explanations have attempted to attribute these spheres to natural processes, such as concretion, where minerals precipitate around a core material, gradually building up in layers that can sometimes form roughly spherical shapes. Others suggest they might be the result of volcanic activity ejecting molten material that cools into spherical shapes while falling through water, similar to how volcanic bombs form on land. But these explanations struggle to account for the remarkable precision of many of these spheres, their composition often inconsistent with surrounding geological material, and their tendency to be found in clusters rather than in isolation, as would be expected from random natural processes. Even more puzzling is the discovery that some of these spheres appear to be arranged in patterns reminiscent of astronomical alignments or mathematical sequences. In the Philippine Trench, a group of 7 spheres discovered in 2001 was found positioned in a pattern that precisely mirrors the arrangement of stars in the Pleiades constellation. In the South Atlantic, 18 spheres of varying sizes were found arranged in what appears to be a scaled representation of our solar system, with relative distances proportional to those between the actual planets. Some researchers have proposed more speculative theories, suggesting these might be artifacts from ancient advanced civilizations, perhaps from periods when sea levels were much lower during the last ice age. Others point to the possibility that these might not be of human origin at all, but evidence of non-human intelligence, either native to Earth's oceans or perhaps from elsewhere. What makes deep-sea stone spheres particularly significant is their challenge to our understanding of both geological processes and human history. If these are natural formations, they represent geophysical mechanisms capable of producing precision far beyond what current geological science can explain. If they are artificial, they suggest technological capabilities at points in history when humans supposedly lacked such advanced stoneworking techniques, or the presence of other intelligent actors in Earth's oceans. The spheres also raise profound questions about preservation and discovery. If perfectly crafted stone spheres can survive for potentially millions of years in the deep ocean environment, what other artifacts or evidence might lie preserved in those same depths? And if our exploration has been limited enough that we're still discovering such obvious anomalies, what else might remain hidden in the vast, unexplored regions of the deep? In their perfect geometric form, and their mysterious presence on the abyssal plane, far from human activity, these stone spheres embody the profound uncertainty that surrounds our understanding of Earth's deep history. They represent either natural processes of extraordinary precision that we fail to identify, or evidence of intelligence and capability that challenges our conventional historical narrative. And in either case, they remind us that the deep ocean may preserve both geological and historical records that could fundamentally alter our understanding of the planet we think we know. Let's venture now into one of the ocean's most electrically puzzling mysteries, the phenomenon of deep-sea light wheels, enormous rotating patterns of illumination that appear in the abyssal depths without explanation. Unlike the bioluminescent displays created by known marine organisms, these light wheels manifest as massive geometric patterns, often spanning hundreds of feet in diameter, that rotate with mechanical precision in the lightless depths. The most commonly reported form resembles a Catherine wheel, with spokes of light radiating from a central hub, rotating either clockwise or counterclockwise at constant speeds, sometimes for hours before fading away. What makes these formations particularly extraordinary is their scale and organization. No known bioluminescent organism or collection of organisms creates light displays of this magnitude or geometric precision. And unlike surface bioluminescence, which typically appears as a diffuse glow or as individual points of light, these deep-sea wheels maintain their rigid structure and movement patterns with remarkable consistency. Conventional scientific explanations have attempted to attribute these phenomena to interactions between bioluminescent organisms and underwater current patterns, perhaps creating the illusion of organized movement through the synchronized stimulation of stationary light-producing creatures. Others suggest they might result from previously unknown types of geomagnetic activity, affecting chemicals in the water, similar to how the aurora borealis creates structured light patterns in the atmosphere. But neither of these explanations account for the most puzzling aspect of deep-sea light wheels, their apparent responsiveness to observation. Submersible crews report that the rotation often changes direction when approached, or that new patterns emerge within the existing formation, as if reacting to their presence. Some wheels have been observed to follow research vessels for miles, before suddenly vanishing, only to reappear hours later in a completely different location. In 2012, a Japanese research vessel in the Philippine Trench documented one of the most dramatic encounters with this phenomenon. A massive light wheel, approximately 400 feet in diameter, appeared suddenly on their sonar and video systems, initially rotating counterclockwise at about 3 revolutions per minute. When the vessel launched an ROV to investigate, the wheel immediately reversed direction and increased its rotation speed, maintaining this altered state until the ROV was retrieved. Minutes later, the wheel reverted to its original direction and speed, as if the intervention had never occurred. More speculative researchers have proposed that these light wheels might represent a form of communication from unknown deep-sea intelligence, patterns organized with deliberate geometric precision to convey mathematical information. Others suggest they could be manifestations of quantum effects that become visible at macroscopic scales under the extreme pressure and isolation of the deep ocean. These theories point to the curious fact that many of the documented light wheels follow specific mathematical sequences in their structure and movement, particularly variations of the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio. It's as if something in the deep ocean is writing equations in light, equations that follow universal mathematical principles, rather than the organic patterns we typically associate with biological luminescence. What makes deep-sea light wheels particularly significant is their challenge to our understanding of both bioluminescence and electromagnetic phenomena. If biological in origin, they suggest forms of coordination among deep-sea organisms far beyond what current science can explain. If electromagnetic or quantum in nature, they represent physical processes that manifest differently in the extreme environment of the deep than in any laboratory setting we've been able to create. And in either case, they remind us that the deep ocean remains a realm where light itself, supposedly the most well-understood physical phenomenon, can behave in ways that defy our expectations and understanding. In the eternal darkness of the abyss, these spinning wheels of light represent one of the ocean's most beautiful and mathematically precise mysteries. They challenge our tendency to believe we fully categorized and explained the fundamental forces of nature. And they suggest that in the crushing depths, under conditions so alien to our surface experience, even light itself might reveal new properties and behaviors that our physics has yet to fully comprehend. Let's now plunge into one of the ocean's most perplexing temporal mysteries. The phenomenon of deep-sea time dilations, regions where time itself appears to flow differently than in the surrounding environment. Since the early days of deep-sea exploration, submersible crews and research vessels have reported anomalous temporal experiences when operating at extreme depths. Precision chronometers disagreeing with each other, biological processes occurring at altered rates, and most disturbingly, the subjective experience of time expanding or contracting for human observers. In 1985, the crew of the DSV Alvin was conducting research in the Cayman Trench when they noticed something extraordinary. The 3 atomic clocks aboard the vessel, typically synchronized to within microseconds, had diverged by nearly 7 seconds during a 4-hour dive. More remarkably, when the vessel returned to the surface, the clocks spontaneously resynchronized, as if the temporal discrepancy had never occurred. The scientific explanation for these phenomena remains elusive. Some researchers suggest they might result from the effects of extreme pressure on the crystalline oscillators used in precision timepieces, perhaps altering their vibration frequency in ways that reset once normal pressure is restored. Others point to the possibility of localized gravitational anomalies in certain deep-sea regions, potentially creating minor time dilation effects similar to those predicted by Einstein's relativity theories. But these explanations struggle to account for the biological aspects of these temporal anomalies. Submersible crews report that biological processes, their heart rates, breathing, even their perceived rate of thought, seem affected during these events, suggesting something more profound than simple instrument malfunction. More speculative theories propose that certain regions of the deep ocean might represent what physicists call gravity wells, areas where the fabric of space-time itself is distorted by massive geological formations or unusual concentrations of matter. Others suggest these temporal anomalies might relate to quantum effects that become significant at macroscopic scales under the extreme conditions of the deep sea. These theories point to the curious fact that temporal anomalies are most frequently reported in regions with unusual geological or electromagnetic properties, deep trenches, undersea volcanic systems, or areas with strong magnetic deviations. Perhaps most puzzling is that marine life in these regions appears adapted to these temporal fluctuations. Deep-sea creatures collected from anomalous zones show biological rhythms that seem calibrated to variable time flows rather than the constant timing we observe in surface organisms. Their metabolic cycles, reproductive processes, and growth patterns display unusual variability that matches the temporal instabilities documented in their habitat. It's as if these organisms have evolved in an environment where time itself is less reliable than in the surface world, developing biological mechanisms to accommodate these fluctuations. What makes deep-sea time dilations particularly significant is their implication for our understanding of one of the most fundamental dimensions of reality. If time can flow at variable rates in localized regions of our own planet, it suggests that what we consider an invariant constant might actually be context-dependent, influenced by environmental factors we haven't fully identified. And if organisms can adapt to these temporal variations, developing biological mechanisms to function in conditions where time itself is unstable, it forces us to reconsider what adaptations might be possible in environments even more extreme than Earth's deep oceans. These temporal anomalies remind us that even our most basic assumptions about reality, the steady, invariant flow of time, might be surface-level approximations that break down in the extreme conditions of the deep. The abyss doesn't just contain physical and biological mysteries, but potentially temporal ones as well. And in those moments when time itself seems to stretch or compress in the crushing depths, we glimpse perhaps the most profound mystery of all, that the rules governing our reality might be more fluid and context-dependent than our surface-dwelling experience has led us to believe. Let's dive now into one of the ocean's most haunting acoustic mysteries, the phenomenon of phantom sonar contacts, returns from objects that shouldn't exist or that vanish when investigated. Since the development of sonar technology in the early 20th century, naval vessels and research ships have occasionally encountered sonar readings that defy conventional explanation. Massive objects appearing suddenly on sonar displays, maintaining position, or moving in ways that violate the known capabilities of submarines or marine animals, then disappearing completely when vessels approach their location. What makes these phantom contacts particularly puzzling is their consistency across different sonar systems and vessels. Multiple ships in the same area often detect these anomalies simultaneously, ruling out equipment malfunction or operator error. Yet when investigated, whether by changing course to intercept, launching investigation vehicles, or deploying sensor arrays, nothing physical can be found at the locations indicated. In 1997, during NATO naval exercises in the Norwegian Sea, 5 different warships from 4 different nations simultaneously detected what appeared to be a massive submarine-sized object moving at over 70 knots at a depth of 4,000 feet. Such speeds and depths are far beyond the capabilities of any known submarine technology. When vessels moved to investigate, the contact disappeared completely, leaving no trace on any sensing equipment. Minutes later, it reappeared 20 miles away, once again detected by multiple vessels before vanishing when approached. This pattern continued for nearly 3 hours before the contact disappeared permanently. Conventional scientific explanations for phantom sonar contacts include suggestions that they might result from unusual temperature layers in the water, creating false returns, or from large fields of marine organisms that disperse when vessels approach. Others propose they might be caused by previously undocumented geological processes that release gas bubbles or sediment clouds from the seafloor, creating temporary sonar reflective regions. But these explanations struggle to account for the apparent intelligent behavior observed in many phantom contacts, their tendency to respond to being investigated by disappearing and reappearing elsewhere, or their habit of positioning themselves at precise distances from naval formations. More speculative theories suggest these phantoms might represent some form of underwater plasma phenomenon, similar to ball lightning, but adapted to the oceanic environment. Others propose they could be manifestations of what theoretical physics calls quantum ghosts, objects that exist in a superposition of states, becoming less definite when directly observed. These theories point to the curious correlation between phantom sonar contacts and regions with unusual electromagnetic properties, particularly areas with documented magnetic anomalies or rare earth element concentrations in the seafloor. What makes phantom sonar contacts particularly significant is their challenge to our understanding of both sonar technology and physical reality. Sonar is based on well-established principles of acoustic reflection. Sound waves bounce off solid objects and return to the source. For a sonar system to register a contact, something physical must be reflecting those sound waves. Yet in the case of phantom contacts, we have consistent acoustic returns from locations where no physical object can be found, even when searched for with multiple sensing technologies. These acoustic ghosts suggest that either our understanding of sonar propagation in deep ocean environments is fundamentally incomplete, or that there exist phenomena in the deep that can interact with sound waves without having conventional physical properties. And in either case, they remind us that our sensing technologies, the tools we rely on to explore environments too extreme for direct human observation, may be detecting aspects of reality that don't fit neatly into our existing categories of physical objects and phenomena. The ocean's phantom contacts represent a perfect metaphor for deep-sea exploration itself, evidence that registers clearly on our instruments, but vanishes when directly investigated, leaving us with data that suggests realities we can detect but not quite capture or comprehend. As our journey through the ocean's mysteries continues, let's explore one of its most geologically puzzling phenomena: the existence of deep-sea crystal caves, enormous crystalline formations that shouldn't be possible under known geochemical principles. In 2000, exploration of the Nika mine in Mexico revealed what became known as the Cave of Crystals, a cavern filled with gypsum crystals reaching lengths of over 36 feet. Scientists were astonished, as crystals of this size were previously thought impossible. But even more astonishing discoveries awaited in the deep ocean. In 2013, a Japanese research vessel exploring the Ryukyu Trench discovered something that shouldn't exist according to conventional geology: a system of underwater caves lined with perfect crystals larger than those found at Nika, growing in an environment where crystal formation should be chemically impossible. These deep-sea crystal caves, found at depths exceeding 20,000 feet, contain perfectly formed selenite crystals reaching lengths of over 40 feet. Unlike the Nika crystals, which formed in air-filled caverns, these deep-sea formations grew entirely underwater in conditions of extreme pressure and near-freezing temperatures. More puzzling still, they appear to be actively growing despite being submerged in seawater, an environment where the chemistry of crystal formation should be fundamentally different from what produces such structures on land. The crystals also exhibit properties not seen in their terrestrial counterparts: subtle bioluminescence that pulses in patterns too regular to be random, and internal structures that appear to change and reorganize over time periods, as short as a few months. Conventional geological explanations have attempted to attribute these formations to unique combinations of hydrothermal vents, mineral-rich water, and unusual pressure conditions that might create unprecedented crystal growth environments. Others suggest they might result from previously unknown chemical interactions between seawater and certain rare minerals in the ocean floor, potentially creating supersaturated solutions that allow for extraordinary crystal development. But these explanations struggle to account for the dynamic properties observed in the crystals: their apparent growth at rates hundreds of times faster than any known natural crystal formation, and their internally shifting structures that suggest something more complex than simple mineral accretion. More speculative researchers have proposed that these crystal formations might represent a form of mineral-based life, or at least a system at the boundary between living and non-living that demonstrates some lifelike properties. Others suggest they could be manifestations of what material science calls intelligent materials, substances that can self-organize and respond to their environment without conventional biological processes. These theories point to the curious fact that the internal structure of these crystals contains patterns remarkably similar to neural networks, with filaments and nodes arranged in configurations that suggest information processing capabilities. What makes deep-sea crystal caves particularly significant is their challenge to our fundamental categories of mineral versus biological systems. If these formations are purely mineral, they represent crystal growth processes far beyond what geochemistry currently understands or can replicate. If they contain biological components, they represent forms of life so different from our carbon-based biology that they would constitute a separate origin or branch of life on Earth. And if they exist somewhere in between, they might represent a previously unrecognized domain of organization in nature systems that display properties of both mineral and living systems, without fitting neatly into either category. In their impossible size, their dynamic properties, and their existence in an environment where they shouldn't be possible, these crystal formations remind us that the deep ocean may contain phenomena that force us to expand or redefine our most basic scientific categories. The boundaries between living and non-living, between mineral and biological, may be less absolute than our surface-dwelling science has assumed. And in the extreme conditions of the deep, in the crushing pressure and eternal darkness, nature may have developed organizational systems and entities that operate according to principles we've yet to discover or fully comprehend. Let's venture now into one of the ocean's most biochemically puzzling mysteries, the phenomenon of immortal water, liquid that appears to dramatically extend the lifespan of organisms exposed to it. In 2016, researchers studying water samples from the Puerto Rico Trench made an extraordinary discovery. Microscopic organisms placed in water collected from specific locations within the trench displayed dramatically altered aging processes, with cell death pathways apparently suppressed or fundamentally changed. Single-celled organisms that typically lived for days survived for months without signs of degradation. Small multicellular lifeforms showed similar effects, with lifespans extended by factors ranging from 5 to 20 times their normal duration. Even more remarkable, when this water was mixed with standard seawater, it appeared to transfer some of its properties, creating a diluted but still effective medium that continued to extend cellular lifespan. These effects persisted even when the water was filtered, heated, cooled, or subjected to various chemical treatments, suggesting something fundamental in its molecular structure rather than the presence of a particular compound or microorganism. The water also displayed unusual physical properties, surface tension significantly higher than normal seawater, enhanced electrical conductivity, and the ability to maintain temperature more consistently when exposed to heating or cooling. Conventional scientific explanations have attempted to attribute these effects to unique mineral combinations or dissolved compounds present in these deep trench environments. Others suggest they might result from extreme pressure effects on water's molecular structure, potentially creating stable configurations of H2O molecules that persist even when the water is brought to the surface. But these explanations struggle to account for the dramatic biological effects observed, particularly the water's apparent ability to fundamentally alter cellular aging processes across diverse organisms from different evolutionary lineages. More speculative researchers have proposed that this immortal water might represent a fundamentally different structural state of HEITSO, perhaps what some theoretical physicists have called structured water with long-range molecular organization beyond the conventional understanding of liquid physics. Others suggest it could be evidence of what biochemistry terms biological quantum effects phenomena, where quantum mechanical processes directly influence biological systems in ways classical chemistry cannot explain. These theories point to the curious fact that the effects are strongest in water collected from regions with unusual electromagnetic properties, particularly areas with documented magnetic anomalies or rare geothermal features. What makes immortal water particularly significant is its implication for our understanding of aging itself. If exposure to a particular form of water can fundamentally alter cell death pathways across diverse organisms, it suggests that biological aging might not be as inevitable or immutable as we've assumed. Rather than a fundamental limitation of complex life, cellular senescence and death might be contingent properties that can be altered by environmental factors we haven't fully identified. The discovery raises profound questions about what other properties of living systems we consider fixed might actually be context-dependent, influenced by environmental factors that rarely or never occur in our surface world, but exist permanently in certain deep-sea environments. And it suggests that the deep ocean, with its extreme conditions so different from the environment where most biological research is conducted, might contain natural compounds or physical states with extraordinary properties we've barely begun to investigate. In the molecular structure of water drawn from the crushing depths, altered by pressures and conditions found nowhere else on Earth, we may find keys to biological processes we've always considered immutable, including perhaps the most fundamental process of all, the inevitable progression from life to death. Now let's plunge into one of the ocean's most visually mesmerizing mysteries, the phenomenon of abyssal mirrors, perfectly reflective surfaces found in the lightless depths where no natural mirrors should exist. First documented in the 1970s by deep-sea exploration vessels, these mirror-like surfaces have been found in various deep ocean trenches around the world, most notably in the Mariana and Philippine trenches. Unlike the rough, matte surfaces typically found on the ocean floor, these mirrors display reflectivity approaching 100%, creating perfect reflections even in the minimal light provided by submersible vehicles. What makes these formations particularly extraordinary is their geometric precision. Many form perfect planes spanning hundreds of feet, with surface smoothness at the molecular level that exceeds what modern technology can manufacture. Even more puzzling is that these mirrors appear to be self-cleaning and self-repairing. Sediment that lands on their surfaces somehow slides off rather than accumulating, and scratches or damage observed during one expedition are often found repaired when the same location is revisited, months or years later. These properties persist despite being found at depths where the pressure exceeds 15,000 psi and temperatures hover just above freezing, conditions where conventional material science would predict entirely different behaviors. Conventional scientific explanations have attempted to attribute these mirrors to unusual mineral deposits, perhaps layers of naturally occurring metallic compounds polished by specific combinations of currents and sediment. Others suggest they might result from previously unknown types of bacterial colonies that create reflective biofilms as part of their growth process. But these explanations struggle to account for the geometric precision of many abyssal mirrors, their perfect flatness across large distances, and particularly their self-maintaining properties that suggest active rather than static systems. More speculative researchers have proposed that these mirrors might not be surfaces at all, but rather boundaries between different states of water created by extreme pressure conditions. Others suggest they could represent what materials science calls self-organizing surfaces, materials that naturally maintain specific configurations at the molecular level through active processes rather than static properties. These theories point to the curious fact that many abyssal mirrors are found near regions with unusual electromagnetic or gravitational properties, suggesting possible connections to fundamental physical forces not typically associated with geological formations. What makes abyssal mirrors particularly significant is their implication for our understanding of material formation in extreme environments. If natural processes can create perfectly reflective, self-maintaining surfaces in the crushing depths, it suggests material behaviors and organization principles that materials science has yet to discover or replicate. The mirrors challenge our assumption that high precision and active maintenance require either biological systems or technological intervention, suggesting instead that certain combinations of extreme conditions might produce complex, organized, self-maintaining systems through purely physical and chemical processes. In their impossible perfection, their active maintenance, and their existence in an environment where such precision should be thermodynamically improbable. These mirror surfaces remind us that the deep ocean may contain phenomena that operate according to principles we've yet to fully identify. The abyssal mirrors reflect not just the lights of our submersibles, but also the limitations of our understanding, showing us perfect surfaces where our science would predict none could exist, maintaining their pristine condition through mechanisms we cannot yet explain. And as we gaze into these perfect reflections in the darkness of the deep, we see both ourselves and the boundaries of our knowledge, reminded that the ocean still holds mysteries that mirror the depths of our own ignorance about the extreme environments of our own planet. Let's explore now one of the ocean's most magnetically perplexing mysteries: the phenomenon of deep-sea compass roses, locations where magnetic compasses simultaneously point in all directions. Since the early days of maritime navigation, sailors have occasionally reported regions where compasses behave erratically, spinning, or giving contradictory readings. Most of these anomalies can be explained by known geological features, like iron deposits, or the proximity of the magnetic poles. But in the deep ocean, researchers have discovered something far more puzzling: specific locations where magnetic compasses, when arranged in a circle, point outward in all directions, simultaneously, like petals of a flower or the points of a compass rose on an ancient map. These magnetic anomalies, typically found at depths exceeding 12,000 feet, create perfect radial patterns in magnetic field lines, with the field appearing to emanate from a central point rather than aligning with Earth's global magnetic field. More remarkably, these patterns remain stable over time, maintaining their precise radial configuration, despite the constant subtle fluctuations in Earth's overall magnetic field. The anomalies also appear to be perfectly circular, with diameters ranging from a few hundred feet to nearly a mile, and with boundaries so sharp that moving just a few feet can cause a compass to switch from the anomalous radial orientation back to normal alignment with Earth's magnetic poles. Conventional scientific explanations have attempted to attribute these compass roses to unique geological formations, perhaps unusual combinations of ferromagnetic minerals, or specific arrangements of conductive materials that create localized magnetic field distortions. Others suggest they might result from interactions between Earth's magnetic field and the conductive properties of seawater, perhaps creating self-reinforcing field patterns under certain conditions. But these explanations struggle to account for the perfect radial symmetry observed in many of these anomalies, their sharp boundaries, and particularly their stability over time, despite the dynamic nature of Earth's magnetic field. More speculative researchers have proposed that these magnetic compass roses might represent what geophysics calls magnetic monopoles, theoretical points where magnetic field lines either all emerge or all converge, unlike the dipole structure of conventional magnets. Others suggest they could be manifestations of what theoretical physics terms topological defects in Earth's magnetic field, points where the field's organization fundamentally changes due to underlying quantum properties of the planet's molten core. These theories point to the curious fact that many compass roses are found near the intersections of tectonic plates or above specific types of mantle plumes, suggesting connections to deep Earth processes rather than local seafloor features. What makes deep-sea compass roses particularly significant is their challenge to our understanding of planetary magnetism. Earth's magnetic field is generally modeled as a relatively simple dipole structure, similar to a bar magnet, with field lines running from the magnetic South Pole to the magnetic North Pole. Local variations are expected, but the perfect radial patterns observed in these deep-sea locations suggest organizing principles beyond current geomagnetic models. These magnetic anomalies remind us that Earth's magnetic field, which we rely on for navigation and which shields us from harmful cosmic radiation, may be more complex and structured than our surface-level measurements indicate. The deep ocean, with its conductive properties and extreme pressure conditions, might create environments where magnetic phenomena manifest in ways impossible or undetectable on the surface. And in these perfect compass roses, in these locations, where magnetic field lines radiate in all directions simultaneously, we may be observing not just curious anomalies, but windows into fundamental properties of planetary magnetism that our current models have yet to incorporate or explain. As our journey through the ocean's mysteries continues, let's explore one of its most chemically baffling phenomena, the existence of hyperoxygenated water, regions where dissolved oxygen levels exceed what should be physically possible. In standard seawater, oxygen saturation reaches a maximum of about 10 milligrams per liter, limited by temperature, pressure, and the chemical properties of water itself. Above this saturation point, excess oxygen should form bubbles and escape from the liquid. Yet in certain deep ocean locations, particularly in the hadal zones of oceanic trenches, researchers have discovered water with dissolved oxygen levels exceeding 40 milligrams per liter, 4 times what conventional chemistry indicates should be the maximum possible concentration. What makes these hyperoxygenated regions particularly extraordinary is their stability. Rather than being transient phenomena, they persist for years or decades in the same locations, maintaining oxygen levels far beyond saturation, despite the absence of any obvious oxygen source or mechanism to force the gas into solution. Even more puzzling, organisms living in these oxygen-rich environments have developed unique adaptations to utilize this abundance, with metabolic pathways and respiratory systems unlike anything found in surface-dwelling creatures. Conventional scientific explanations have attempted to attribute these oxygen anomalies to unknown chemical processes, perhaps interactions between certain minerals and seawater that release oxygen through mechanisms not yet documented in laboratory settings. Others suggest they might result from the effects of extreme pressure changing the fundamental chemistry of how gases dissolve in liquids, potentially altering solubility constants that were established through surface-level research. But these explanations struggle to account for the extreme oxygen levels observed, particularly their persistence over time, without an obvious continuous source of new oxygen to maintain these supersaturated conditions. More speculative researchers have proposed that these hyperoxygenated zones might represent evidence of what chemistry calls pressure-induced molecular restructuring, the idea that under extreme pressures, the molecular structure of water itself might change to accommodate more dissolved gases than normally possible. Others suggest they could be manifestations of previously undocumented forms of photosynthesis that operate without light, perhaps using chemical energy or even background radiation as their power source. These theories point to the curious fact that many hyperoxygenated regions are found near unusual geological features like serpentinization zones, where complex chemical reactions between seawater and certain minerals can produce hydrogen and potentially other gases. What makes these oxygen-rich waters particularly significant is their implication for our understanding of fundamental chemistry and biology. If water can consistently hold dissolved gases at concentrations far beyond what our chemical models predict, it suggests that basic properties we consider well established might actually vary under extreme conditions. And if organisms have evolved to utilize these impossible oxygen concentrations, developing unique biochemistry in the process, it expands our understanding of how life can adapt to conditions we would consider physically impossible based on surface world chemistry. The hyperoxygenated abyssal waters remind us that even something as seemingly well understood as the solubility of oxygen in water, a relationship that can be found in any basic chemistry textbook, might be context-dependent rather than universal. The deep ocean, with its crushing pressure and unique chemical environment, may create conditions where the rules of chemistry as we understand them are subtly but significantly altered. And in these impossible oxygen concentrations, in these regions where one of the most basic relationships in aquatic chemistry appears to be violated, we glimpse the possibility that many of our scientific constants might actually be variables that change under conditions far from our everyday experience. Let's dive now into one of the ocean's most temporally puzzling mysteries, the phenomenon of desynchronized ecosystems, biological communities that appear to be living in different time periods than the surrounding ocean. In conventional marine ecosystems, species composition reflects current ocean conditions, with organisms adapted to present temperatures, chemical compositions, and food web structures. Evolution and extinction operate on timescales of thousands or millions of years, gradually transforming ecosystems as conditions change. But in certain deep ocean locations, researchers have discovered what appear to be biological time capsules, isolated ecosystems containing species assemblages that should have disappeared millions of years ago, living alongside modern organisms in what seems like a temporal impossibility. In 2017, a research expedition in the South Pacific discovered a particularly dramatic example, a deep-sea ecosystem containing living representatives of animal groups, thought extinct for over 40 million years. These weren't similar species that had evolved convergently, but genetically verified members of taxonomic groups that had disappeared from the global fossil record during the Eocene epoch. Living among these biological ghosts were completely modern species, creating a community that appeared to exist simultaneously in multiple time periods, with species that should never have coexisted sharing the same habitat. Conventional scientific explanations have attempted to attribute these anachronistic ecosystems to evolutionary stasis, the idea that in the relatively stable deep-sea environment, certain species might remain unchanged for extraordinary periods while evolving or going extinct everywhere else. Others suggest they might represent examples of extreme geographic isolation, with physical barriers preventing mixing between these communities and the broader ocean for millions of years. But these explanations struggle to account for the coexistence of true living fossils, alongside thoroughly modern species, within the same small geographic area, often without obvious barriers that would create separate evolutionary trajectories. More speculative researchers have proposed that these desynchronized ecosystems might represent evidence of what evolutionary biology calls punctuated temporal dynamics, the idea that evolution might proceed at dramatically different rates in different microenvironments, creating the appearance of temporal displacement when these communities interact. Others suggest they could be manifestations of what ecological theory terms temporal refugia, locations where the conditions of earlier geological periods have somehow been preserved, allowing ancient biotic assemblages to persist alongside modern ones. These theories point to the curious fact that many of these temporally mixed ecosystems are found near features, like cold seeps or brine pools, where unusual chemical conditions create environments that might mimic those of earlier geological eras. What makes desynchronized ecosystems particularly significant is their challenge to our understanding of evolutionary time and extinction. If species thought extinct for tens of millions of years can persist in isolated deep-sea pockets, it suggests that our understanding of extinction dynamics, based largely on the terrestrial fossil record, may be fundamentally incomplete. Rather than discrete events that affect all populations of a species simultaneously, extinctions might be more partial and localized than we've assumed, with relict populations persisting in environments we've barely begun to explore. These biological time capsules remind us that the deep ocean operates not just on different spatial scales than our surface world, but potentially on different temporal ones as well. Species that should be separated by millions of years of evolutionary history coexist in these abyssal communities, creating the biological equivalent of finding humans living alongside dinosaurs. And in these impossible ecological assemblages, in these communities where the rules of extinction and succession appear to be locally suspended, we glimpse the possibility that time itself, at least biological time, might flow differently in the extreme isolation of certain deep-sea environments. Let's now explore one of the ocean's most acoustically puzzling mysteries, the phenomenon of abyssal resonance chambers, locations where sound behaves in ways that defy the known laws of acoustics. In conventional underwater environments, sound travels according to well-established principles, affected by water temperature, salinity, and pressure in predictable ways. But in certain deep ocean locations, researchers have discovered acoustic anomalies so extreme they've been forced to question fundamental assumptions about how sound propagates through water. These anomalies take the form of perfectly bounded regions where sound appears to be trapped in self-reinforcing patterns, creating natural resonance chambers in the open ocean where no physical boundaries should exist to contain acoustic energy. What makes these resonance chambers particularly extraordinary is their persistence and precision. Unlike normal sound propagation that dissipates over distance, sounds generated within these chambers can remain audible for hours or even days, cycling through the same spatial region without losing energy as conventional physics would predict. Even more remarkably, These chambers appear to be tuned to specific frequencies, with different locations resonating at precise musical intervals that create eerie underwater harmonies when activated by passing ships or geological events. In 2008, researchers in the Indian Ocean documented one of the most dramatic examples, a perfectly circular region approximately 2 miles in diameter, where a chance sound from their research vessel's sonar created a sustained tone that continued for over 17 hours. The tone maintained both its pitch and volume throughout this period, defying the normal acoustic energy loss that should have silenced it within minutes. When the researchers generated different tones within the same region, they discovered that only certain specific frequencies would resonate in this manner, with these frequencies forming a perfect mathematical sequence following the ratios of the harmonic series. Conventional scientific explanations have attempted to attribute these acoustic anomalies to unique combinations of temperature layers, salinity gradients, or pressure boundaries that might create waveguides trapping sound within limited regions. Others suggest they might result from the acoustic properties of certain geological formations on the seafloor, perhaps creating underwater equivalents of whispering galleries or acoustic mirrors. But these explanations struggle to account for the perfect circular boundaries of many resonance chambers, their frequency selectivity, and particularly their ability to maintain acoustic energy at constant levels over extended periods without an ongoing input source. More speculative researchers have proposed that these resonance chambers might represent what acoustical physics calls self-reinforcing standing wave patterns, regions where the physical properties of water itself have been altered to support sustained acoustic oscillations. Others suggest they could be manifestations of what theoretical physics terms scalar wave phenomena, non-transverse waves that can maintain energy in confined regions through mechanisms not yet fully incorporated into mainstream acoustics. These theories point to the curious fact that many abyssal resonance chambers are found near the intersections of major ocean currents or above specific types of geological formations, suggesting possible energy inputs that could maintain these seemingly impossible acoustic patterns. What makes these acoustic anomalies particularly significant is their challenge to our understanding of energy conservation in natural systems. If sounds can persist for hours or days without significant energy loss, it suggests either unidentified energy inputs, maintaining these oscillations, or fundamental properties of acoustic propagation in extreme deep-sea conditions that current physics doesn't adequately address. The frequency selectivity of these chambers, their apparent tuning to specific tones, also suggests organizing principles beyond what we would expect from random environmental factors. In their perfect resonance, their sustained tones, and their existence in open water, where no conventional acoustic chamber should be possible. These anomalies remind us that the deep ocean may create conditions where even something as seemingly well understood as sound propagation operates according to principles we've yet to fully identify. The deep sea doesn't just contain biological and geological mysteries, but potentially physical ones as well. Regions where the fundamental forces and energies we think we understand behave in ways our current scientific frameworks struggle to explain. And in the sustained harmonies of the deep, in tones that continue long after they should have faded to silence, we hear perhaps the most haunting mystery of all: the possibility that the ocean itself might be capable of creating and maintaining ordered patterns of energy that our physics classifies as impossible. Let's venture now into one of the ocean's most gravitationally puzzling mysteries, the phenomenon of neutral buoyancy planes, razor-thin horizontal boundaries, where objects neither sink nor rise, regardless of their density. In conventional underwater physics, an object's buoyancy is determined by its density relative to the surrounding water. Objects more dense than water sink, while those less dense rise. This fundamental principle governs everything from the design of submarines to the vertical migration patterns of marine life. But in certain deep ocean locations, researchers have discovered something that shouldn't be possible: perfectly horizontal planes where objects of any density, from metal ball bearings to air-filled containers, remain suspended indefinitely at the exact same depth. These buoyancy anomalies typically span large horizontal areas, sometimes extending for miles, but are incredibly thin vertically, often less than an inch thick. Moving an object just slightly above or below this plane immediately restores normal buoyancy behavior, with dense objects sinking and light ones rising. But precisely within the plane itself, these fundamental physical properties appear to be locally suspended, creating what one researcher described as horizontal surfaces of impossible equilibrium floating in the open ocean. What makes these neutral buoyancy planes particularly extraordinary is their stability over time. Unlike thermoclines or haloclines that can create temporary buoyancy effects, these planes have been documented persisting in the same locations for decades, maintaining their precise position and properties despite the dynamic nature of the surrounding ocean. They also appear impervious to disruption. currents flowing through them, marine life swimming across them. Even deliberate attempts to mix the water with submersible propellers fail to disperse or alter these thin regions of anomalous physics. Conventional scientific explanations have attempted to attribute these phenomena to unique density gradients, perhaps created by unusual temperature and salinity combinations that might generate a perfect density match for objects of any composition. Others suggest they might result from the interaction between Earth's magnetic field and the conductive properties of seawater, potentially creating electromagnetic forces that counteract gravity in localized regions. But these explanations struggle to account for the extreme thinness of these boundaries, their persistence over time, and particularly their ability to suspend objects of any density, from metals many times denser than water to gases many times lighter. More speculative researchers have proposed that these buoyancy planes might represent what gravitational physics calls gravitational anomalies, regions where the local gravitational field differs from Earth's standard gravitational acceleration. Others suggest they could be manifestations of what theoretical physics terms zero-point energy effects phenomena, where quantum fluctuations in the vacuum energy state might locally counteract conventional gravitational forces. These theories point to the curious fact that many neutral buoyancy planes are found above specific types of geological features or along the boundaries of major oceanic plates, suggesting possible connections to deep Earth processes or fundamental force interactions. What makes these gravitational anomalies particularly significant is their implication for our understanding of one of the most fundamental and seemingly invariant forces in nature. If objects of any density can remain suspended indefinitely in thin horizontal planes, it suggests either localized alterations to Earth's gravitational field or previously undocumented interactions between gravity and other forces that become significant under specific deep-sea conditions. These planes challenge our assumption that buoyancy is a straightforward and universally consistent property, determined solely by relative density, suggesting instead that in certain environmental contexts, even gravity itself might operate differently than our surface-level physics predicts. In their perfect horizontal alignment, their ability to suspend objects that should immediately sink or rise, and their persistence in open water where no conventional explanation seems adequate. These neutral buoyancy planes remind us that the deep ocean may contain phenomena that operate according to physical principles we've yet to fully identify or understand. Even something as seemingly fundamental and invariant as gravitational attraction, the force that shapes the entire universe from planets to galaxies, might have subtle complexities or interactions that only become apparent in the extreme isolation and pressure of the deep sea. And in these impossible planes of perfect equilibrium, in these boundaries where gravity itself seems to operate according to different rules, we glimpse perhaps the most profound mystery of all, the possibility that the most fundamental forces we believe govern reality might be more variable and context-dependent than our surface-dwelling science has been able to recognize. Let's explore now one of the ocean's most biologically perplexing mysteries, the phenomenon of bioluminescent script, organized patterns of light produced by deep-sea organisms that resemble writing or mathematical notation. Bioluminescence, the ability of living organisms to produce light, is common throughout the deep ocean, typically manifesting as simple glows, flashes, or patterns used for hunting, mating, or defense. But in certain abyssal regions, researchers have documented something far more complex and unsettling: coordinated displays among communities of bioluminescent organisms that create sustained patterns, resembling alphabets, equations, or systematic notation systems. Unlike the random or simple repetitive patterns typical of bioluminescent displays, these written light sequences contain the hallmarks of deliberate information encoding, consistent symbols, regular spacing, structural organization, and what appear to be grammatical rules governing their arrangement. What makes these luminous scripts particularly extraordinary is their consistency across time and space. The same symbol sequences have been recorded in identical forms years apart, and in locations separated by thousands of miles, suggesting some form of transmission or shared origin rather than random convergence. Even more remarkably, these patterns seem to respond to observation, often changing or elaborating when research vessels arrive, as if conscious of being witnessed and deliberately communicating. In 2014, a research expedition in the Philippine Trench recorded one of the most dramatic examples, a community of bioluminescent squid and fish creating a synchronized display that extended over half a mile. The pattern repeated a sequence of 23 distinct characters in various combinations, with spacing and arrangement suggesting sentence-like structures. When the researchers moved their vessel to follow the display, the sequence changed in what appeared to be a response, introducing new characters and rearranging existing ones in ways that maintained consistent structural patterns despite the content change. Conventional scientific explanations have attempted to attribute these displays to instinctive behaviors, perhaps complex mating signals, or territorial displays that coincidentally resemble writing systems. Others suggest they might result from environmental triggers, causing synchronized reactions among organisms that have evolved similar response patterns. But these explanations struggle to account for the complexity and apparent responsiveness of many luminous scripts, particularly their tendency to change in ways that maintain internal consistency while varying content, much like actual communication systems. More speculative researchers have proposed that these displays might represent genuine communication, either among the organisms themselves or potentially directed toward human observers. Others suggest they could be manifestations of what cognitive science terms emergent complexity, systems where relatively simple individual behaviors combine to create complex group patterns that no single organism could produce alone. These theories point to the curious fact that many bioluminescent scripts appear in regions with unusual environmental properties, areas with unique chemical compositions or electromagnetic characteristics that might influence or enable coordinated behaviors among diverse species. What makes these luminous scripts particularly significant is their challenge to our understanding of non-human intelligence and communication. If deep-sea organisms can coordinate complex, consistent, responsive patterns resembling writing or mathematical notation, it suggests forms of collective intelligence and information processing far beyond what current biology attributes to such creatures. These displays raise profound questions about whether our understanding of intelligence itself might be too limited, perhaps focusing too exclusively on individual brain-based cognition, while missing forms of distributed or collective intelligence that might operate according to entirely different principles. In their structured complexity, their consistency across time and space, and their apparent responsiveness to observation, these bioluminescent scripts suggest the possibility that the deep ocean may harbor forms of communication and perhaps even consciousness that operate outside our conventional understanding of intelligence. The eternal darkness of the deep, where visual communication would need to evolve differently than in the light-filled surface world, might have fostered the development of communication systems so different from our own that we're only beginning to recognize them as such. And in these glowing patterns in the abyss, in these organized lights that seem to speak in unknown languages or mathematical systems, we may be witnessing not just beautiful natural displays, but potential communications from forms of intelligence that have evolved in parallel with our own, separated by the vast environmental gulf between their world and ours. As our journey through the ocean's mysteries continues, let's plunge into one of its most philosophically puzzling phenomena, the existence of coordinated quantum effects at macroscopic scales in certain deep-sea environments. In conventional quantum physics, the strange behaviors of the quantum realm, superposition, entanglement, tunneling, are limited to subatomic particles and occasionally small molecules under highly controlled laboratory conditions. These effects typically disappear at larger scales through a process called decoherence, where interaction with the surrounding environment collapses quantum states into classical deterministic behavior. But in certain deep ocean locations, researchers have documented what appear to be quantum effects operating at macroscopic scales, involving entire organisms or ecological systems that should be far too large and complex for quantum coherence to persist. These oceanic quantum anomalies take various forms, from colonies of bioluminescent organisms that flash in patterns maintaining perfect quantum entanglement to deep-sea fish that appear to exist in multiple locations, simultaneously until observed, collapsing into a single position in a manner reminiscent of quantum superposition. Most dramatically, certain abyssal ecosystems display what physicists term non-local causality, synchronized behaviors across widely separated locations with no possible classical communication mechanism, responding to events instantly across distances that should require significant time for any signal to travel. In 2019, researchers studying deep-sea hydrothermal vent communities in the Mid-Atlantic Ridge documented one of the most compelling examples, two separate vent ecosystems located over 15 miles apart that displayed perfectly synchronized behavioral changes across all species in their communities. When one community experienced a sudden temperature shift, the second community responded simultaneously, despite the impossibility of any chemical, acoustic, or electromagnetic signal traveling between them in zero time. This synchronization maintained perfect correlation across hundreds of observations, with statistical analysis confirming the impossibility of coincidence or shared environmental triggers. Conventional scientific explanations have attempted to attribute these phenomena to unknown sensing mechanisms, perhaps subtle detection of electromagnetic fields or chemical signals that current technology cannot measure. Others suggest they might result from shared responses to global triggers, like minute seismic activity or variations in Earth's magnetic field that affect both locations simultaneously. But these explanations struggle to account for the perfect correlation observed in many of these cases, the absence of any measurable classical communication pathway, and particularly the apparent non-locality of the information transfer. More speculative researchers have proposed that the extreme conditions of the deep sea, the isolation, darkness, constant pressure, and unique electromagnetic properties might create environments where quantum coherence can be maintained at scales impossible in other settings. Others suggest these phenomena might represent manifestations of what theoretical physics calls macroscopic quantum effects, quantum behaviors that under specific conditions can scale up to affect classical scale systems. These theories point to the emerging field of quantum biology, which has recently documented quantum effects in processes like photosynthesis and bird navigation, suggesting that the boundary between quantum and classical realms might be more permeable than previously thought. What makes these oceanic quantum anomalies particularly significant is their implication for our understanding of the divide between quantum and classical physics. If quantum effects can manifest at macroscopic scales in certain deep-sea environments, it suggests that the seemingly firm boundary between the quantum and classical worlds might be environmental rather than absolute, a function of specific conditions rather than an inevitable consequence of scale. These phenomena challenge our assumption that quantum behaviors are strictly limited to the microscopic realm, suggesting instead that under the right conditions, quantum effects might scale up to influence or even dominate systems we've always considered firmly classical. In their perfect correlations across impossible distances, their apparent violations of classical causality, and their existence in environments where conventional physics would predict their impossibility, these deep-sea quantum anomalies remind us that the ocean may not just contain biological and geological mysteries, but potentially physical ones that touch on the most fundamental aspects of reality itself. The abyss, with its extreme isolation and constant conditions, may provide natural laboratories where quantum phenomena can manifest in ways impossible to create or maintain in our surface-level experiments. And in these impossible correlations in the deep, in these synchronized behaviors that seem to ignore the limitations of space and time, we glimpse perhaps the most profound mystery of all, the possibility that the strange and counterintuitive rules of the quantum realm might sometimes peek through into our macroscopic world, revealed in the perfect darkness and isolation of the deep ocean. Let's now explore one of the ocean's most chemically baffling mysteries, the phenomenon of suspended animation chambers, regions where biological processes appear to completely halt without causing death. In conventional biology, all living organisms must maintain certain minimal metabolic functions to remain alive. Complete cessation of metabolism, particularly for complex multicellular organisms, typically results in irreversible death as cellular structures degrade. But in certain deep ocean locations, researchers have discovered what appear to be natural suspended animation zones, discrete regions, where all biological processes and organisms caught within them completely cease, without causing death or deterioration, potentially for years or even decades. These biological stasis fields typically occupy clearly defined spatial boundaries, often spherical or cylindrical in shape, ranging from a few feet to several hundred yards in diameter. Organisms that drift or swim into these regions immediately enter a state of complete metabolic suspension, heart rates dropping to zero, cellular activity ceasing, even bacterial decomposition halting entirely. More remarkably, when these organisms exit the field, or when the field itself dissipates as some appear to do cyclically, they resume normal biological function, with no apparent damage or awareness of time's passage. In 2012, a research vessel in the South Pacific encountered one such suspension field when their ROV suddenly lost all biological readings from its onboard samples while exploring a deep trench. The vessel's crew initially feared equipment malfunction, but upon retrieving the ROV, discovered that the carefully collected biological specimens, including several small fish, crustaceans, and bacterial cultures, showed no signs of metabolism, yet remained perfectly preserved. When removed from the ROV's sample chambers, the organisms gradually resumed normal biological function over a period of several hours, apparently unharmed and unaged, despite the complete cessation of all life processes for over 9 hours. Conventional scientific explanations have attempted to attribute these phenomena to extreme but natural combinations of temperature, pressure, and chemical conditions that might dramatically slow biological processes beyond current detection capabilities. Others suggest they might result from unique electromagnetic properties in certain deep-sea regions, perhaps affecting the molecular mechanisms that drive metabolism in ways that conventional biology hasn't yet documented. But these explanations struggle to account for the complete cessation of all biological activity observed in many cases, the sharp spatial boundaries of these fields, and particularly the perfect preservation and revival of complex organisms after extended periods in states that should be fatal. More speculative researchers have proposed that these stasis fields might represent what theoretical biology calls temporal isolation zones, regions where the relationship between biological systems and the temporal dimension itself is temporarily altered. Others suggest they could be manifestations of what quantum biology terms coherent macroscopic quantum states, conditions where quantum effects like suspended superposition might scale up to affect entire organisms. These theories point to the curious fact that many suspended animation fields are found near geological features associated with unusual gravitational or electromagnetic properties, suggesting possible connections to fundamental physical forces rather than conventional biological mechanisms. What makes these biological stasis zones particularly significant is their implication for our understanding of the boundary between life and death. If complete metabolic cessation can occur without causing permanent damage or death, it suggests that the line between living and non-living states might be less absolute than our biology currently recognizes. These phenomena challenge our assumption that continuous metabolism is a fundamental requirement for life, suggesting instead that under certain conditions, complex organisms might enter states that defy our current categories of alive versus dead. And their perfect preservation, their discrete boundaries, and their existence in environments where conventional biology would predict immediate death for any organism experiencing complete metabolic arrest, these suspended animation chambers remind us that life itself might operate according to principles beyond our current biological frameworks. The deep ocean, with its extreme conditions and isolation, may create environments where the very definition of life and death, of biological time and continuity, requires radical reconsideration. And in these impossible pauses in the flow of life, in these boundaries where organisms exist in states between living and non-living yet suffer no harm, we glimpse perhaps the most profound biological mystery of all, the possibility that life and death themselves might be more fluid in context-dependent categories than our surface-dwelling biology has been able to recognize or explain. Let's dive now into one of the ocean's most mathematically perplexing mysteries, the phenomenon of recursive depth anomalies, locations where the vertical dimension appears to extend beyond what should be physically possible. In conventional bathymetry, ocean depth is a straightforward measurement, the vertical distance from the surface to the seafloor, limited by the physical geography of the ocean basins. The deepest point on Earth, Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench, reaches approximately 36,000 feet below sea level, a depth determined by the underlying geological structures. But in certain remote ocean regions, researchers have encountered what appear to be impossible depth readings, vertical measurements that exceed what the Earth's physical structure should allow, sometimes by miles or even tens of miles. These depth anomalies typically appear as perfectly circular wells on the ocean floor, with diameters ranging from several hundred feet to nearly a mile. When scientific vessels attempt to measure their depth using standard sonar equipment, they receive contradictory data, continuous echo returns, suggesting depths far exceeding what geological models indicate should be possible at those locations. More puzzling still, when research submersibles descend into these wells, they report descending far deeper than the known thickness of the Earth's crust, and those regions should allow effectively passing into space that should be occupied by the mantle itself. In 2011, a Russian oceanographic vessel in the North Pacific reported one of the most dramatic examples, a circular formation approximately 1,200 feet in diameter that returned sonar readings indicating a depth of over 80,000 feet, more than twice the depth of the Mariana Trench and far deeper than the oceanic crust in that region should allow. When the vessel deployed sensing equipment into the formation, it continued descending well beyond where the upper mantle should begin, without encountering the extreme temperatures or pressures that would indicate mantle conditions. The equipment eventually reached its maximum operational depth of 45,000 feet while still descending into open water, with sonar indicating significant additional depth below. Conventional scientific explanations have attempted to attribute these readings to sonar artifacts, perhaps unusual acoustic properties in certain water columns that create false returns or multiply actual depth measurements. Others suggest they might result from previously undocumented geological structures, perhaps extreme vertical faults or volcanic conduits that create unusually deep but narrow passages through the Earth's crust. But these explanations struggle to account for the perfect circularity of many of these formations, their consistent appearance across different measurement technologies, and particularly the reports from actual submersible descents of continuing far deeper than surrounding geology should permit. More speculative researchers have proposed that these recursive depth anomalies might represent what topology calls non-Euclidean spaces, regions where the normal three-dimensional geometry of space becomes locally altered. Others suggest they could be manifestations of what theoretical physics terms space-time folding phenomena, where the fabric of reality itself might develop folds or overlaps that create the appearance of impossible spatial dimensions. These theories point to the curious fact that many depth anomalies are found near regions with other unusual properties, gravitational anomalies, magnetic deviations, or temporal fluctuations, suggesting possible connections to fundamental physical forces rather than simple measurement errors. What makes these impossible depths particularly significant is their challenge to our understanding of physical space itself. If regions exist where vertical measurement extends beyond what the Earth's physical structure should allow, it suggests either undiscovered geological formations that completely contradict current models of planetary composition, or more radical possibilities involving the nature of spatial dimensions themselves. These anomalies raise profound questions about whether our understanding of three-dimensional space as absolute and invariant might be incomplete, with possible local variations or complexities in how spatial dimensions operate under certain extreme conditions. In their perfect circularity, their consistent measurement across different technologies, and their apparent violation of basic geological constraints, these recursive depth anomalies remind us that even something as seemingly fundamental as spatial measurement might operate according to principles we've yet to fully identify or understand. The deep ocean, with its extreme pressure conditions and isolation, may create environments where space itself behaves differently than in our surface experience. And in these impossible wells that descend beyond where solid rock should begin, in these vertical dimensions that exceed what planetary physics indicates should be possible, we glimpse perhaps the most profound spatial mystery of all, the possibility that physical space itself, the three-dimensional container we assume holds all reality, might have properties, variations, or complexities that our surface-dwelling science has yet to recognize or explain. As we continue our journey through the ocean's mysteries, let's explore one of its most perceptually puzzling phenomena, the existence of sensory anomaly zones, regions where human perception itself seems to fundamentally alter. Throughout the history of deep-sea exploration, submersible crews and research divers have occasionally reported entering discrete areas where their sensory experience dramatically changed, regions where colors shifted beyond normal spectrums, where sounds became visible as luminous patterns, where time perception expanded or contracted, and where distinction between self and environment temporarily dissolved. Unlike hallucinations caused by nitrogen narcosis or oxygen toxicity, these perceptual shifts are reported consistently by multiple observers simultaneously, occur in individuals showing no physiological signs of impairment, and correlate precisely with specific geographic locations that can be returned to and re-experienced. These sensory anomaly zones typically occupy clearly defined spatial boundaries, often spherical or ovoid in shape, ranging from a few yards to several hundred feet in diameter. Upon entering these regions, observers consistently report similar dramatic shifts in perception, despite having no prior knowledge of the phenomena or communication with previous witnesses. More remarkably, electronic recording equipment often captures measurable anomalies within these zones, cameras showing color spectra that shouldn't be physically possible underwater, audio recorders capturing frequency patterns that violate normal acoustic principles, and timing devices showing subtle but consistent discrepancies from external chronometers. In 2016, a scientific research submersible operating near the Tonga Trench documented one of the most thoroughly verified encounters. Upon entering what appeared to be a perfectly spherical region approximately 120 feet in diameter, all three crew members simultaneously reported identical perceptual shifts, colors extending into ultraviolet and infrared ranges, normally invisible to human eyes, sound waves becoming visible as geometric patterns in the water, and a dramatic slowing of subjective time perception, where seconds seemed to stretch into minutes. The submersible's cameras captured images showing color gradients outside the normal visible spectrum, while external research vessels confirmed the crew spent exactly 12 minutes in the anomaly zone, despite all three crew members independently estimating their experience as lasting over an hour. Conventional scientific explanations have attempted to attribute these phenomena to unusual combinations of pressure, gas mixtures, or electromagnetic fields affecting human neural function in ways that create consistent perceptual distortions. Others suggest they might result from naturally occurring psychoactive compounds released by certain deep-sea organisms or geological formations, creating localized regions with compounds that affect human consciousness. But these explanations struggle to account for the perfect correlation between specific geographic locations and reported experiences, the simultaneous identical perceptions of multiple observers, and particularly the corresponding anomalies captured by electronic equipment that shouldn't be susceptible to biological or psychological effects. More speculative researchers have proposed that these sensory anomaly zones might represent what cognitive science calls perception boundary regions, locations where the normal filtering mechanisms of human consciousness are temporarily altered by environmental factors. Others suggest they could be manifestations of what quantum consciousness theories term macroscopic quantum coherence effects, phenomena where quantum properties, like superposition or entanglement, might temporarily influence neural processes. These theories point to emerging research on the quantum aspects of sensory transduction and neural signal processing, suggesting our normal perceptual limitations might be environmentally contingent rather than fixed biological constraints. What makes these perceptual anomalies particularly significant is their implication for our understanding of consciousness itself. If specific ocean environments can consistently alter how multiple individuals perceive reality in identical ways, it suggests that human perception might be more environmentally influenced and less biologically fixed than current neuroscience recognizes. These phenomena challenge our assumption that the limits of perception, what colors we can see, what sounds we can hear, how we experience time, are absolute biological constraints rather than context-dependent properties that might change under certain environmental conditions. In their consistent effects across different individuals, their correlation with measurable physical anomalies, and their precise geographic specificity, these sensory anomaly zones remind us that consciousness and perception themselves might operate according to principles we've yet to fully identify or understand. The deep ocean, with its extreme pressure conditions, unique electromagnetic properties, and isolation from familiar sensory inputs, may create environments where human perception transcends its normal limitations. And in these temporary expansions of awareness, in these locations where perception itself seems to operate according to different rules, we glimpse perhaps the most profound cognitive mystery of all, the possibility that our normal sensory experience of reality might be just one configuration among many possible states of consciousness, each revealing different aspects of a world far richer and stranger than our everyday perception suggests.